Hong Hae-in is the granddaughter of the chairman of Queen's Corporation. She was born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She is not only beautiful and rich, but also extremely smart and talented. However, upon returning from studying abroad, she chooses to work at her father's company as an intern, while keeping her true identity a secret. As a prestigious young lady, using a photocopier is a significant challenge for her. Observing this, her colleague Hyun-woo often lends a helping hand. She suspects he's flirting, but in reality, he's just concerned about the photocopier. He worries that she might get fired one day, as she's not particularly liked in the company. His heart races every time she gets reprimanded by their superiors. When Hae-in asked why that was so, he didn't know how to explain. What Hyun-woo doesn't realize is that Hae-in won't be easily dismissed. No one would dare lay a finger on her. Over time, Hyun-woo develops feelings for Hae-in. He pours out his heart, expressing a desire to take care of her. He talks about his life, including his family's 35 cows back in the countryside and his 2-year lease apartment, different from the usual monthly rent. He also mentions having some extra money. All these details Hyun-woo shares demonstrate his ability to support Hae-in if she loses her job and struggles to find another. Hyun-woo really wants to marry Hae-in and urges her to carefully consider his proposal. Before Hae-in can reveal her true identity, Hyun-woo gives her an umbrella so she can return home, cheerfully braving the rain himself. He didn't know that Hae-in had a personal driver to take her to work every day, and she gradually fell in love with this sincere and kind man. Not long after, Hyun-woo discovered Hae-in's true identity, which left him feeling so embarrassed that he wrote a resignation letter to return to his hometown. However, Hae-in couldn't bear to lose such a good man, so she took a helicopter straight to his house to find him. This moment seemed like something out of a fairy tale, with her appearing like an angel descending from heaven to embrace Hyun-woo's love. After they moved in together, their life wasn't as rosy as before. Numerous problems arose as they had nothing in common. They were together in presence, but not in heart. Despite this, they both denied the rumors of an impending divorce to the press. Hyun-woo consistently affirmed that he and his wife were still happy. Meanwhile, Hae-in wanted to quash the baseless rumors that Hyun-woo was with her for her wealth. They shared a bed, ate breakfast together, and went to the company together. Yet, it was as if they were living in two different worlds, seemingly invisible to each other. Beyond personal issues, their professional lives also clashed. While Hae-in wanted to cut off brands that weren't profitable, Hyun-woo wished to retain them and help improve their performance. This showed his compassionate nature, unwilling to abandon anyone. But faced with a stubborn wife who wouldn't listen, he felt utterly helpless. That day, Hyun-woo intended to end their miserable marriage. He had prepared a divorce settlement to send to Hae-in. Just then, he received a message from Hae-in, urgently summoning him home for an important family meeting. There, Hae-in's parents discussed the couple's future childbearing plans. Hae-in's mother has contacted the doctor and will soon have a pre-pregnancy examination for the couple. Additionally, Hae-in's mother expressed her wish for Hyun-woo to move to the US for 2 years to pursue an MBA after the child was born. Despite his objections, Hyun-woo found his opinions overridden. No matter how much he objected, in the end, he couldn't go against it. His wife's family didn't hold him in high regard, and he had to comply with all their decisions. Moreover, Hae-in's father had already chosen a surname for the grandchild, insisting it should be the mother's, not the father's, countering the patrilineal tradition yet preventing his own grandson from doing the same. Hyun-woo felt disheartened by such treatment from his wife's family. He confided in a close friend, expressing regret about his marriage and how he stirred Hae-in's emotions. He wished she hadn't accepted his proposal so swiftly, as it would have altered the course of his life. He blamed himself for digging his own grave. Overwhelmed with sorrow, Hyun-woo wept like a child, now questioning whether he should divorce Hae-in. Following the emotional turmoil, he trudged home, sobbing and singing a medley of random tunes. Over there, Hae-in was looking through their wedding photos. She could sense that he had endured a lot because of her. A few days later, Hyun-woo sought advice from a psychologist about divorce. Living with his wife's family was like living in hell. A large extended family spanning 3 generations lived together, from the grandfather and in-laws to his younger brother's family. They shared all their activities from weekends to holidays, leaving him no personal time. There were up to 15 Memorial Days a year, and Hyun-woo was expected to prepare everything, with no one in the family lifting a finger to help. Hyun-woo detested not only his wife's family but also his wife even more. She didn't care for him, nor did she care about how her family treated him. Yet, Hyun-woo still lacked the confidence to divorce Haein, fearing his father-in-law who despised people who turned their backs on him. He wondered what the consequences of divorcing Haein would be. Following the consultation, the psychologist prescribed him a strong medication to help him cope with this difficult phase. That day, an aunt came to Hyun-woo and revealed that Haein had made a will before their marriage. She had left all her assets to Queen's Corporation in the event of her demise. This was a shock to Hyun-woo, as his wife had never mentioned this to him. The aunt insinuated that Hyun-woo was nothing but a slave to their family, infuriating him enough to send her away. When he stepped outside, he encountered Haein, who wanted to take him somewhere but he refused. The aunt's words still echoed in his ears, preventing him from complying with his wife's request. He then drove to his parents' home, a place he often visited without Haein. Knowing her son hadn't eaten, his mother prepared a lavish meal. He ate heartily as if he had been starved for days, paying no mind to what his mother was saying. After finishing his meal, Hyun-woo wanted to share something important with his family, announcing his decision to divorce Haein. This revelation left everyone stunned as he expressed his discomfort and unhappiness. However, his parents immediately dismissed his reasons as frivolous. They argued that marriage sometimes has its ups and downs and not everyone can be happy all the time. They cited their own experience where moments of happiness were rare, and his father had to endure much to reach their current state. In response, Hyun-woo stated, "I have thought long and hard before making this decision, and I truly want a divorce." Hyun-woo then returned home, intending to retrieve the divorce papers from the safe and present them to Haein for her signature. He quietly entered Haein's room, hesitantly wanting to talk. Coincidentally, Haein also had something to share with him. She revealed that she was dying with only 3 months left. Shocked by her words, Hyun-woo hid the divorce papers and stammered, "I'm sorry about today and everything that I did until now. It won't happen ever again. I'll treat you better from now on. How can I live without you?" When Haein questioned, "Are you serious?" Hyun-woo couldn't deny it. Then she asked if he couldn't live without her. Would he be willing to die together? Hyun-woo was taken aback by the question and in his confusion, deflected by expressing a desire to hear about her doctor's visit. That day, after Hyun-woo refused to accompany her, Haein went to the hospital alone. The doctor informed her that she had a brain tumor, Kdrama, a very rare condition, apparently the first case in South Korea. It's so dangerous that it can neither be operated on nor treated with medication. This tumor is different from the usual ones because it's dispersed across various nerve fibers. The doctor was certain this was causing Haein's frequent episodes of temporary memory loss. She had often found herself in such states but assumed they were due to lack of focus or dozing off. If it got worse, Haein could experience hallucinations or personality disorders. While the doctor spoke, she began to see hallucinatory images. Haein regained her composure when the doctor called her name loudly. Now, all that could be done was to prescribe medication for her headaches and temporary memory loss. As for a definitive treatment, current medical advancements offered no solutions. Haein had only 3 months left to live. She still couldn't believe the doctor's words. Feeling completely healthy, Haein had always paid close attention to her health, avoiding fast food and snacks, even practicing meditation and yoga regularly. Hyun-woo advised her to forget everything and rest, but how could she sleep peacefully after such shocking news? Hyun-woo felt the same, believing he wouldn't sleep well while distressed about his wife's condition. Contrary to what he said, he slept better that night than ever before. Waking up feeling refreshed, Hyun-woo found comfort in the thought that Haein's impending departure from this world was good news, as it spared him the trouble of a divorce. Looking in the mirror, he saw his face glowing and scolded himself for needing to act sad and troubled in front of Haein. Then, he went to Haein's room and found her motionless. He checked if she was still breathing. Just then, Haein suddenly opened her eyes and without any unnecessary movement, he kissed her. He deemed it a morning kiss, something he had never done in their 3 years of living together. On the way to the company, Haein asked him to keep her condition a secret even from her close family members. Previously, her grandfather had promised to hand over the department store if Haein could generate $1 trillion in revenue. Now that she was close to achieving that, she didn't want anyone to know about her condition. On the other side, Haein's younger brother, Soo-hyun informed their grandfather that the business deal he was in charge of had failed. The grandfather became even more furious when he found out that Soo-hyun had previously overpaid 8 billion won in taxes. Thanks to Hyun-woo's timely discovery, a correction request was filed in time. Without Hyun-woo, that money would have been lost. Now, the organic coffee deal had also failed. The grandfather scolded Soo-hyun for not learning a thing from his sister. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo took Hae-in to ask the doctor if she really had only 3 months left. He wanted to know the exact number, but the doctor couldn't be sure. While Hae-in didn't want to hear more and left, Hyun-woo insisted on staying to know the exact time since it was crucial for his life. Afterward, Hyun-woo met with his close friend, revealing that he would no longer divorce Hae-in. He believed that fate had provided him a safer way out, but it's not convenient to discuss it here. So he wrote down an address on a napkin, asking his friend to meet him there. 30 minutes later, the two met at the agreed-upon address where Hyun-woo whispered to his close friend that Hae-in would pass away in 3 months. Yang-ki questioned whether Hyun-woo would inherit the Queen's corporation, but Hyun-woo immediately dismissed it as impossible. Hae-in had written a will before they married, leaving him nothing, and it was already notarized. Hyun-woo wasn't too concerned about the inheritance. His greatest wish was to peacefully break away from that family in 3 months. Yang-ki then proposed a brilliant idea. In the next 3 months, Hae-in might amend her will so he should do everything possible to win her favor and flattery. Perhaps she would then leave the department store to Hyun-woo. Hyun-woo berated his friend for being so pragmatic, but the next day, he began to implement that strategy. Hyun-woo brought a fresh bouquet of flowers to his wife, mentioning that today was their wedding anniversary. He had made a reservation and prepared a surprise 2 years in advance. However, she was annoyed and didn't want any fuss, so he cancelled it. But now, he genuinely wanted to share it with her. After presenting the flowers to Hae-in, he quietly left, leaving her feeling somewhat unsettled. Back home, Hyun-woo surprisingly wanted to dine with his wife more than ever and even prepared shrimp in a heart shape for her. The household staff were puzzled by Hyun-woo's unusual behavior that day. At the office, when he saw Hae-in coughing, he interrupted his presentation to check on her. He even called for an ambulance, although Hae-in insisted she was just choking on water. He constantly looked for opportunities to show care for Hae-in as if he was courting her all over again. In the evening, Hyun-woo sought advice from his close friend, feeling challenged to change Hae-in after years of living together like strangers. Yang-ki suggested that only love could bring change. They had once defied everything, even their parents, to be together. Marriage could not sustain love. To love forever, you should never get married. On the other hand, Hae-in's father advised his wife not to be too harsh on Hae-in, not wanting the past to haunt her forever. But she couldn't forget the day they lost their son, Soo-hyun. Although everyone said it was an accident, she always believed Hae-in was at fault. From a distance, Hae-in overheard her parents' conversation, finally understanding why her mother always spoke harshly to her. Hyun-woo was researching Hae-in's terrible illness. He was surprised to learn that some patients live only 3 months while others can live up to 30 years. The disease is quite common worldwide, contrary to what the doctor had said, and recovery is possible. When Hae-in returned home, she found Hyun-woo asleep with information about her illness visible. She learned that her condition still held hope for treatment, potentially allowing her to live up to 30 years. At the same moment, Hyun-woo woke up. This incident made Hae-in less suspicious of him. She had previously thought he would be pleased to learn about her illness. But now, she believed Hyun-woo was researching out of care and concern for her. However, Hae-in was unaware of the shocking truth behind his actions. That day, Hae-in attended the opening of the Hersuna store alone, planning to invite the brand to her shopping center. She learned that attending alone might displease Mr. Herman, who values good interpersonal relationships as indicators of potential business partners. Everyone else was accompanied by their partners, except for Hae-in. Subsequently, she called Hyun-woo, who unfortunately was attending a court session. Later, Ina, a competitor, revealed to Hae-in the key to approaching Mr. Herman, his right-hand man, Yoon-seung, who coincidentally knew Hae-in. It seems Yoon-seung had pursued Hae-in during her studies in the US. But she didn't reciprocate his feelings, telling him to stop contacting her. Now, the circumstances had changed and Hae-in told Yoon-seung to keep in touch. Understanding Hae-in's intent, Yoon-seung knew she was seeking a favor. Hae-in got straight to the point. Ina and I are in a brutal competition to bring Hersuna into our stores. It seems like you have a good relationship with Mr. Herman. So tell me, can you help me? While Haein was attempting to approach Mr. Herman, Hyun-woo unexpectedly showed up. After winning a lawsuit, he immediately rushed to the event. They both then started a conversation and got acquainted with Mr. Herman, who was impressed by Haein having such a handsome husband. Soon after, Yoon Se-young approached Hyun-woo and openly admitted that he was Haein's ex-lover. Hyun-woo showed no signs of jealousy, leaving Yoon Se-young genuinely curious whether Hyun-woo truly trusted his wife or simply didn't care about her. Later, Hyun-woo went to the restroom and inwardly criticized Yoon Se-young, suggesting that if he really liked Haein, he should have tried harder to marry her, which would have saved Hyun-woo from his current predicament. However, seeing Haein happy with Yoon Se-young outside stirred a sense of discomfort, and perhaps a hint of jealousy in him. On that day, Haein's extended family organized a hunting trip, attended not only by business associates, but also by Yoon Se-young. Haein's grandfather often held annual hunting events because hunting, like business, requires physical strength, quick judgment, and objective decision-making qualities essential for a business person. This time, Haein wanted to perform well to prove herself to her grandfather. A moment later, Haein spotted her prey but hesitated and couldn't bring herself to shoot, allowing it to escape. Just then, Haein felt something was off and began experiencing hallucinations. Surrounded by thick white smoke, she saw a wild boar charging towards her, triggering traumatic memories from her past. Fortunately, Hyun-woo arrived just in time and shot the boar, saving her. After the gunshot, Haein snapped back to reality. Yoon Se-young also came to check on her, but Hyun-woo said, "Can you wrap up here?" She looked startled. She needs some rest. Then, he took his wife away, much to Yoon Se-young's chagrin. That night, when Hyun-woo went to check, he discovered that a fence had been tampered with, allowing the wild boar to enter their hunting area. He informed the family about this incident. The concubine of Chairman Man-dae insinuated that someone might be trying to harm him. Therefore, Chairman Man-dae decided to check the CCTV footage and also apologized to Yoon Se-young for the unexpected event. After playing the hero, Hyun-woo's stature in the family rose, and for the first time, his father-in-law proactively served him food. At that moment, an uncle walked by with a dog and Chairman Man-dae expressed interest in the dog. The uncle recounted how the dog had saved his son during a house fire by waking and dragging the boy to safety. Impressed, Chairman Man-dae offered to buy the dog, but the uncle adamantly refused to sell it. Shortly after, Yoon Se-young approached the uncle, offering to buy the dog for 100 million won. He set a countdown on his watch, pressuring the uncle to make a decision. Faced with such an absurd offer, the uncle found it impossible to refuse. Yoon Se-young's eyes hinted at an underlying plan. Meanwhile, Haein reminisced about the moment Hyun-woo saved her and even carried her back, feeling her heart stir anew at the thought. Just then, Hyun-woo wrapped in a towel and emerged from the bathroom. Haein's throat kept swallowing, her eyes unable to detach from him. She felt confused, experiencing such strange emotions for the first time, and hid in the bathroom, questioning her feelings. Although they shared a bed, they lay back to back. Hyun-woo couldn't sleep, feeling as if he were on a tiny single bed. Haein recalled a time in Misean village when their love was passionate and they slept in each other's arms, feeling no lack of space. Now, Haein asked Hyun-woo if he wanted to replicate that intimacy here, but Hyun-woo declined, asserting he still had enough space. The next morning, the dog's owner surprisingly approached Yoon Se-young, wanting to return the money. He apologized for not being in his right mind the day before. Yoon Se-young agreed to take the money back, but then he shockingly pointed a gun at the adorable dog. Just as Yoon Se-young was about to shoot, Hyun-woo intervened to stop him. Yoon Se-young claimed, "I was just joking," but it was clear that Hyun-woo didn't find the joke amusing at all. Hyun-woo wanted to witness the transaction's conclusion. He unchained the dog and returned it to the couple. Through CCTV, everyone discovered a stranger near the cut fence, and Man-dae recognized him as BM-sik. He ordered an investigation to determine if BM-sik was still in South Korea. With the mood soured, Man-dae asked everyone to pack up to return home. Meanwhile, the couple recounted an old story about a German shepherd from a brewery being killed. The culprit was a boy from Evergreen Hope Orphanage, who had received a scholarship from the Queen's Corporation. When the police asked why he killed the precious dog, the boy questioned, "What makes a precious dog any different? Then would it be okay to kill a normal dogs?" Thinking of this, they felt that the boy that year was really similar to Yoon Se-young. Yoon Se-young called Haein upon returning home, promising to arrange a meeting with Herman's director for her. Then, Hae-in checked an email from the hospital, regretting to inform her that they couldn't treat her dreadful disease. She pondered whether she was close to death, not wanting this to happen just as she was about to join the Trillion One Club. She had many unfulfilled plans, from wearing limited edition dresses to visiting islands she owned but hadn't set foot on yet. However, she felt the greatest waste would be leaving behind her husband, Hyun-woo. The next day at the office, Hae-in couldn't take her eyes off her husband, her legs moving forward but her gaze remained fixed on him. That night, Hae-in's father and Hyun-woo met with her uncle, Beom-sik. Hae-in's father inquired about Beom-sik's presence at the hunting ground. Beom-sik claimed he went there only to see their father, but Hae-in's father was skeptical, noting that Beom-sik returned home without meeting him. Beom-sik explained that when he arrived, Soo-hyun informed him their father was asleep and denied him entry. Despite his pleas, he couldn't see him and thus returned home. Beom-sik then expressed his desire for Hae-in's father's help to reconcile with their father before it was too late. Back at home, Beom-jun questioned Soo-hyun about his brother's account. She countered, stating Beom-sik never asked for permission to meet their father and advised, "I don't like saying this, but be wary of him. He's been holding a grudge for a while after getting kicked out. Those who have nothing to lose are the most fearful." Meanwhile, Hae-in's mother wanted Grace-go to investigate Yoon-seung's background. She knew of his business dealings but was clueless about his character. Instead of probing, Grace-go approached Yoon-seung, revealing this inquiry and questioning his prospects with Hae-in. As a well-known matchmaker, she offered to assist Yoon-seung in winning Hae-in over in exchange for a substantial fee. It turned out that Grace-go was the one who cut the fence to let the wild boar in, acting under someone else's instructions. Hyun-woo's close friend Yang Ki was pleased to hear that Hyun-woo was subtly implementing the plan they discussed. However, Yang Ki was worried that if Hae-in ever discovered the truth, it would be the end for Hyun-woo. That day, Hae-in arrived at the meeting point with Mr. Herman, only to find Yoon-seung instead. He explained that Mr. Herman's daughter had an urgent need, prompting his return home, which greatly annoyed Hae-in, who had prepared extensively for the meeting. Meanwhile, upon hearing that Hae-in was meeting with Yoon-seung, Hyun-woo became worried and immediately called her. Since Hae-in stepped out, Yoon-seung took the liberty to rummage through her bag and turn off her phone, even going as far as to shut it down completely. When Hae-in returned, Yoon-seung queried her about her husband, Hyun-woo. She asserted, "He's a good man. You saw how he jumped in to save me in that dangerous moment." However, Yoon-seung laughed and claimed Hae-in was mistaken. "I saw him hesitating. He hesitated to save you," Hae-in countered, highlighting the difference between the two men. "You stood there watching him at that moment while he was looking out for me." This clearly showed in Hae-in's eyes that Yoon-seung was no better and she had absolute trust in her husband. But Yoon-seung suggested that Hae-in didn't fully trust Hyun-woo, which left her slightly unsettled because there was some truth to it. To deflect, Hae-in took a sip of wine, unaware that Yoon-seung had spiked her drink with a sleeping pill. Afterwards, he took Hae-in home and informed Hyun-woo that she was very drunk. While Hyun-woo showed concern, Yoon-seung sported a self-satisfied smile. At the same time, Hae-in also woke up, scolding her husband for talking loudly and disrupting her sleep and for saying a friendly goodbye to Yoon-seung. Yoon-seung also reminded Hae-in, "Don't forget to drink orange juice in the morning. That's your hangover cure." He acted as if he knew everything about Hae-in, also as a way to provoke Hyun-woo. Inside the house, Hyun-woo wanted to know why Hae-in had drunk so much. Hae-in expressed, "Because it was unlike me. I'm going to try new things from now on. It's so unfair. I lived differently from others so I could live a long, healthy life. But look at me now. It was all useless. I'm going to speak my mind, do everything I want and kill those who deserve it." Hearing his wife's words left Hyun-woo in shock. If she ever found out he had been deceiving her emotionally during this time, it would be the end for him. Hae-in looked for her phone, puzzled as to why it was turned off. When she powered it on, she saw many missed messages and calls from Hyun-woo. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo was in a panic. He rushed to prevent her from seeing these messages, creating an awkward scene. He let go of Hae-in's phone, but she wasn't willing to stop. She had mentioned wanting to change everything about herself, so now was the time to act. Hae-in then gave Hyun-woo a sweet kiss. He stood still enjoying the moment, yet filled with internal worry. Later, Hyun-woo sneaked into Hae-in's room and after several attempts, finally unlocked her phone. The password was 1031, a date significant to both of them. He proceeded to delete all the messages he had sent her. Just as he was about to leave, Haein unexpectedly entered and asked what he was doing. Hyun-woo claimed he couldn't sleep. Haein, thinking he was lured by their recent kiss, insisted on keeping him there. Overwhelmed, Hyun-woo searched for any excuse to safely return to his room. Once outside, he was moved by the number 1031. Haein had once been pregnant, and the couple was overjoyed. That number represented the predicted birth date of their child, October 31st. They had happily prepared a nursery full of hopeful stars. But now, only a solitary star remained on the ceiling, and Hyun-woo fought back tears as he recalled those painful memories. The next morning, Haein dressed up in a stunning outfit for Hyun-woo to admire, planning to wear it for her meeting with Mr. Herman. Hyun-woo was utterly mesmerized, unable to take his eyes off his wife. He couldn't comprehend how he had never noticed In's beauty all this time. That evening, Haein and Yoon Seung were en route to meet Mr. Herman. Yoon Seung suggested she switch to their brand of shoes, but Haein declined, opting to wear the shoes Hyun-woo had bought her that morning after noticing her discomfort in her Hersina shoes. At the meeting, Mr. Herman desired a two-level store, but Haein mentioned Sarah, startling him as she was his new lover, planning to open a store in Haein shopping center. This meant there would be no room for a two-level store for him. Mr. Herman felt compelled to agree with Haein's design. Yoon Seung alone knew about Mr. Herman's new affair, a piece of information he used to help Haein clinch the deal. Moreover, Yoon Seung had several other strategies at his disposal to use against Mr. Herman. Immediately after, Haein texted her husband to come home because she had good news to share. Coincidentally, Yang Ki was with Hyun-woo, who assumed she was going to amend her will to leave everything to Hyun-woo. So, he hugged his friend tightly to celebrate while Hyun-woo still had no idea what the good news was that Haein wanted to share. He returned home without forgetting to buy Haein a bag of peanut cakes, mentioning he hurried back so they wouldn't get cold. The good news Haein wanted to share was that she had found the best cancer treatment center in Asia. This left Hyun-woo feeling deflated. She was overjoyed at having a chance to escape death, attributing her fortune to divine mercy and the support of a good husband. However, she had no idea about the turmoil inside Hyun-woo, harboring emotions completely contrary to hers. In a fit of desperation, he ran and screamed loudly, feeling all his plans were about to collapse. If Haein were cured, his life would revert to the previous norm, enduring the haunted house and a nagging wife for 3 years. Now, if he mentioned divorce, it seemed like he could never escape his doomed fate. Just thinking about it overwhelmed Hyun-woo with despair. That day, Haein invited Yoon Seung over as a token of gratitude for his assistance the previous day. Hyun-woo boasted to Yoon Seung about Haein's care and attention towards him. In response, Yoon Seung remarked, "She's not like that to me. She always asks me for help, claiming I'm the only one who can assist her. It's always been this way. She'd call me anytime seeking help, stating I was the only one she had." Hyun-woo felt hurt, but managed only a forced laugh. Later, Hyun-woo confronted his wife to inquire why she always got angry when he touched her hair while she never reacted when Yoon Seung did the same. He expressed his desire for Haein to get angry at anyone who did that in the future, except for her hairstylist. Haein didn't respond and walked away, but she smiled, knowing her husband was beginning to show signs of jealousy. Hyun-woo felt compelled to leave the two to discuss their work, but he remained uneasy outside, despising Yoon Seung's smile. His frustration intensified when Yoon Seung drew the curtains closed. Overcome with curiosity, Hyun-woo stood guard at the door to overhear their conversation. Upon hearing Haein's voice, he burst in only to find nothing amiss. Despite Haein's insistence that he rest in another room, he resolutely stayed, vigilantly watching over her like a bodyguard. Just then, Soo-cheol hurried in upon learning that Yoon Seung was visiting. His aim was merely to disrupt his sister's plans. He didn't want to see Haein succeed and inherit the corporation. Soo-cheol even claimed he was closer to Yoon Seung than his own brother-in-law, Hyun-woo, and he brazenly kicked Hyun-woo out of the room. That evening, Hyun-woo confided in his close friend, Yang Ki, who proposed another strategy: let Yoon Seung fall in love with Haein. However, Hyun-woo immediately rejected the idea, considering Yoon Seung a dangerous individual. He stated it could be anyone else, but absolutely not Yoon Seung. Grace-go showed Haein's mother, Mrs. Sianhua, a few photos of Yoon Seung, who is often seen with influential figures. She also provoked Mrs. Sianhua by mentioning Yoon Seung's involvement in helping Haein attract the Hersina brand, implying that her beloved son Soo-hyun would be overshadowed by his sister. If Hae-in joins the billionaire club, the chairman might lean towards handing over the corporation to her, with Yoon Se-young playing a potentially pivotal role in reversing the situation. If Mrs. Seon-hwa could win Yoon Se-ja's favor, he might switch sides to assist Soo-hyun. Upon returning home, Grace Go informed Yoon Se-young about her conversation, confident that everything was going as planned. She knew Mrs. Seon-hwa would believe her, having worked for the family for 15 years. When Hae-in returned home, her mother awaited her to discuss her actions that made Yoon Se-young disregard investing in Soo-hyun. She accused Hae-in of being indifferent to others' demise, only focusing on saving herself. Devastated by her mother's words, Hae-in was fortunate to have Hyun-woo's timely support, who then took her to their room to rest. He suggested she disclose her illness to the family, but she refused, fearing their shock. The family had already lost a child, so she didn't want anyone to know, choosing to seek treatment on her own. That day, Hyun-woo's father campaigned for his re-election as village head. Despite his efforts, it seemed the villagers had little trust in him. At that moment, his daughter-in-law Hae-in arrived with a convoy from the Queen's Corporation, leaving the entire village bewildered by the unexpected turn of events. Hyun-woo's sister had previously messaged Hae-in expressing concern that their father might not be favorably received by the villagers in his bid for re-election, prompting Hae-in to make a surprise return to the village to support her father-in-law. Hae-in elegantly stepped out to the amazement of everyone present, introducing herself as Mr. Do Gwon's daughter-in-law. She then had her team distribute an array of nutritional supplements, ginseng, cosmetics, silk scarves and more. She ensured that everyone present received these gifts, significantly boosting Mr. Do Gwon's standing. The villagers cheered joyously, and it became clear that Mr. Do Gwon was set to win the election by a considerable margin. Following her visit to the village, Hae-in returned to her in-law's house and entered the room where Hyun-woo had grown up. She discovered a music player in a drawer and decided to listen to it, immersing herself in the familiar melodies when a young boy approached. Hae-in introduced herself as the daughter-in-law of the family, but the boy appeared skeptical. He knew everyone in the house, but had never seen Hae-in before. She explained, somewhat flustered, "I don't come here often. I'm the wife of Baek Hyun-woo, the son of this family." Hearing this, the boy politely bowed and greeted her, also expressing his desire to sit in the luxurious car parked outside. Hae-in then instructed the chauffeur to take the boy for a ride around the neighborhood. Just then, the music player slipped from her grasp. As she bent down to pick it up, fragments of memory surfaced and Hae-in began experiencing hallucinations. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo returned to his parents' house to find his wife, but discovered she was nowhere to be seen. In a rush of concern, he hopped on his father's bicycle and started scouring the village to locate Hae-in. As dusk fell, Hae-in wandered aimlessly along the unfamiliar village path, at which point Hyun-woo arrived, visibly upset. He had heard Hae-in was visiting and had come back, but upon his return, he couldn't find her either at his parents' house or the cultural center. He tried calling, but Hae-in didn't answer her phone, leaving Hyun-woo anxious to know what had happened, as he was deeply concerned for her. Hae-in mentioned she was just out for a walk and asked him not to overreact, as she wasn't a patient. Still irritated, Hyun-woo turned to leave Hae-in behind, but then the streetlights suddenly illuminated the path. That's when Hae-in confessed, I don't remember at all why I was there. I was in front of your house. Then suddenly, I was somewhere else." Tears welled up in Hae-in's eyes as she expressed her fear. Without a word, Hyun-woo rushed to embrace her, sensing that her condition was deteriorating. They held each other in tears, exchanging no words, yet fully aware of each other's thoughts and feelings in that poignant moment. It turns out that Hae-in and Hyun-woo were once schoolmates. The day Hyun-woo transferred to the new school coincided with Hae-in's departure to study abroad. After bidding farewell to her classmates, Hae-in accidentally fell outside and Hyun-woo was there to offer her a bandage. Not only did he provide the bandage, but he also took the initiative to apply it for her. Embarrassed, Hae-in hurriedly left and dropped her music player. That's why Hyun-woo had kept it all these years, and both of them just brushed past each other, hence they still couldn't recall that fateful day. Back in the present, Hyun-woo took Hae-in back home on his father's bicycle and they had to take shelter for a while due to the heavy rain. Hyun-woo asked Hae-in why she came back alone. She revealed that his sister had informed her about their father's potential loss in the election. His rival was winning the villagers' hearts with food, so she returned to help her father-in-law win by employing a similar strategy. Hearing this, Hyun-woo was genuinely moved, realizing that the wife he once thought indifferent could also be so endearing. At the same time, Hyun-woo's family was searching for them, feeling relieved and joyful when they found the couple safe and sound. Back at home, Hyun-woo took the initiative to dry Haeun's hair, a moment so tender that it left them both a little flustered, as it had been years since they shared such intimacy. Everyone felt that Haeun and Hyun-woo were making positive progress, so Hyun-woo's mother advised everyone not to mention the topic of divorce to her daughter-in-law. Hyun-woo's father was particularly worried because he had once revealed this matter to a neighbor, but he assumed it wasn't a problem since they were both drunk at the time. Meanwhile, as Hyun-woo was dressing Haeun's wound, she wondered why the lifeline on her palm was so short, associating it with her serious illness and speculating that she might not have long to live. Hearing this, Hyun-woo became furious, not wanting Haeun to believe in such superstitions. "You said God was on your side, and that a miracle would happen. You said the best cancer center in Europe would cure everything." Hyun-woo scolded her loudly, not wanting her to harbor negative thoughts, but then he gently cleaned her wound bit by bit. This moment of closeness stirred something in them, their hearts racing faster than ever. Haeun closed her eyes, anticipating a sweet kiss from her husband, but suddenly, he hesitated and awkwardly rushed out of the room. Confused to the point of wearing the wrong slippers, Hyun-woo wondered what he had been about to do. Now, he was unsure how to proceed. Leaving might panic her, but returning could be a mistake. Meanwhile, Haeun thought Hyun-woo had just stepped outside for something, perhaps to use the restroom or take a phone call. But as time passed and he didn't return, she texted to ask where he was, only to receive a message from Hyun-woo advising her to go to sleep first. Anxious, she went outside to look for Hyun-woo and found him drinking at his brother's house. Seeing this, she quietly returned home. Back in her room, she told herself that there was no need to share a bed. They had been sleeping separately for years anyway. 2 years prior, due to Haeun's miscarriage, she was so distressed that she had someone clear out the room they had prepared for their baby. When Hyun-woo inquired about the reason, Haeun said they no longer needed it, a response that left him extremely frustrated. He then had his belongings moved to another room, marking the start of their separate sleeping arrangements. The sorrow of losing their child was too much for Hyun-woo to bear, and Haeun felt the same. Despite maintaining a facade of being okay, their hearts were far from peaceful. Back to reality, Haeun sat in a corner, deep in thought about everything, unable to sleep until dawn broke. At that moment, Hyun-woo trudged back home, and found Haeun still sitting there. Her dark circles were a clear indication that she had stayed awake all night. Following this, she started packing to return to the city. Her mother-in-law handed her a bag of fresh vegetables to take along with everyone behaving warmly, hiding the fact that Hyun-woo was considering divorce. After the couple departed, the family sensed that Haeun and Hyun-woo were indeed facing issues, with Hyun-woo's brother revealing that he hadn't returned to his room the previous night. His sister couldn't comprehend. How could their love die? They used to be madly in love. 4 years ago, Hyun-woo's sister had tried everything to keep them apart, not yet aware of Haeun's affluent background. She offered Haeun money to leave her brother, to which Haeun firmly replied, "I will never break up with him." At that moment, Hyun-woo appeared, visibly upset with his sister. Mi-seon thought Haeun wasn't her brother's type, believing he preferred gentle women, not someone as assertive as Haeun. Hyun-woo admitted that was true but explained that his preferences changed after meeting Haeun. He then took Haeun's hand and they left together, with Haeun not forgetting to take the money off the table. Now, Mi-seon couldn't understand how their feelings had shifted so drastically, unaware of the many underlying reasons. Returning home, Haeun was still very upset with Hyun-woo, repeatedly stating that she hadn't stayed up all night waiting for him. Unexpectedly, Yoon-seong showed up and took Haeun into the house, while Hyun-woo could only watch his wife being led away by another man. Inside, Yoon-seong revealed to Hyun-woo that Haeun's mother had invited him to stay. "She must felt bad that I had to eat alone at the hotel. Haeun and I have business to do, so staying here will be more convenient for us." Hyun-woo was at a loss for words. From what Grace Go had disclosed, he knew that he and Haeun were having marital issues and they had even been sleeping separately for many years. Therefore, Yoon-seong saw this as an opportunity to step in, potentially taking Haeun and the family corporation. That day, Haeun had to visit the hospital to consult with her doctor, who opined that even the best center in Europe couldn't cure her brain tumor completely. Treatment could only manage it partially, not eradicate it. Hearing this, Haeun was furious. She resolved to go there for treatment regardless of what he said, determined to find a way to live even if it meant searching the entire world. Outside the hospital, Hae-in saw an employee from her company. Normally, she would ignore such encounters, but this time was different. Hae-in decided to stop and inquire about his daughter. Knowing he was struggling financially to pay for her medical treatment, she had an idea. Hae-in proposed to regularly order juice from his family, not just for herself but for all the company's employees. He was overjoyed by this order, as it would help him earn a substantial amount of money to cover his daughter's medical bills. On the other side, Soo-hyun presented a comprehensive resort project to his grandfather, only needing him to prepare the land, while Yoon-seong would be the investor. Soo-hyun portrayed Yoon-seong as a very emotional person, urging everyone to trust him. Sitting across from them, Hyun-woo objected, arguing that they needed to verify the legality of the land. Relying on Yoon-seong for a 2 trillion business venture was too risky. The grandfather agreed with Hyun-woo's concerns. He wanted all potential risks evaluated before commencing the project. That day, Mrs. Byum-ya intentionally caused trouble with her young stepmother. Mrs. Byum-ya insisted that Mrs. Soo-hyun taste all the food in her presence before it could be served to the chairman, suspicious of what Mrs. Soo-hyun might add to it, comparing her to the court ladies of ancient times. Without a word, Mrs. Soo-hyun asked everyone to step outside, and then she shut the door firmly behind them. She grabbed a hammer and disabled the CCTV camera. She believed that Mrs. Byum-ya had been disrespectful to her for 20 years, so she decided to teach her a lesson. She delivered a forceful punch to Mrs. Byum-ja's stomach as a warning. After the incident, the two were brought before Mr. Manday to resolve the matter. He was well aware of his daughter's temperament, so he sided with his current wife, ignoring what Mrs. Byum-ya had to say. That day, as Hae-in was on her way to meet partners at Hersana, she experienced hallucinations again. She found herself standing in a forest blanketed entirely with white snow, beginning to feel terrified by these visions. Just as Hae-in's legs wobbled and she nearly fell, Yoon-seong unexpectedly appeared to catch her, helping her snap out of the hallucination. Yoon-seong, feeling puzzled because Hae-in seemed very strange, but she insisted she was still doing okay. Seeing her instability, he supported Hae-in as they walked, and coincidentally, they ran into Hyun-woo in the elevator. Witnessing this scene made Hyun-woo quite jealous, but he tried to remain calm and approached them to ask what was going on. However, Hae-in dismissed it, urging him not to worry. Yoon-seong felt that Hae-in was truly acting out of the ordinary, and Grace-go revealed that she had been to the hospital previously. Yoon-seong tasked Grace-go with investigating which hospital it was and what ailment Hae-in was suffering from. The next day, Hae-in consulted her doctor again, who advised that she couldn't go to Germany for treatment just yet because her white blood cell count was too low, making her ineligible for the experimental treatment they were considering. He wanted her to wait until her white blood cell count increased, but Hae-in was too frustrated to consider waiting any longer. She stormed out, still convinced she wasn't in pain, arguing that if she were, she would have detected the tumor earlier. This conversation was unintentionally overheard by Mrs. Byum-ya. Hae-in was startled to see her aunt there, but then confided everything to her, asking her to keep the matter confidential. She also mentioned that only Hyun-woo knew about her condition. Mrs. Byum-ya was deeply worried about her niece and constantly reassured her, encouraging Hae-in to stay strong through her ordeal. Over here, Mr. Manday is showing Yoon-seong around his private gallery, which houses many valuable art pieces he has collected. Yoon-seong recalls a story from the past, when he was awarded a scholarship by Mr. Manday's corporation. Mr. Manday was on stage giving an inspiring speech to the students, and everyone around was applauding his speech. However, Yoon-seong stood still with a face full of resentment, suggesting some unresolved issues between the two. Meanwhile, Hae-in is on her way to the airport to fly to Germany for treatment. Seeing her niece traveling alone, Mrs. Byum-ya offers to accompany her, but Hae-in declines. Back at home, Mrs. Byum-ya confronts Hyun-woo, asking why Hae-in is traveling to Germany alone. She is surprised by what Mrs. Byum-ya tells him and criticizes Hyun-woo for letting Hae-in go by herself when he alone knew about her condition. She continuously questions why this is happening. Hyun-woo then tries to call Hae-in, but she has already turned off her phone as she is on the plane, leaving him to blame himself. Upon arriving in Germany, Hae-in is immediately taken for an evaluation by doctors there, who conduct numerous tests to determine if she qualifies for treatment. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo watches Haeun's old interview videos every day. Her dream was to achieve sales of over 1 trillion won. After reaching that goal, she wanted to take a break and travel with her husband. She looked forward to walking, drinking tea, chatting, and sharing more deeply with him. Hyun-woo rewatches that part of Haeun's interview over and over. Tears begin to fall unnoticed. The very next morning, Hyun-woo rushes to the airport to fly to Germany. He cannot bear to let her be there alone. At the same time, Haeun was refused immediate treatment by the doctors, who wanted her to wait longer to monitor her condition. Her condition had worsened, and they were unsure if the treatment would be beneficial. Hearing this, Haeun felt truly disappointed and anxious about her health. To relieve some stress, she visited several famous tourist spots in the area. While resting, her feet aching from high heels, she thought she heard Hyun-woo calling her name. Wondering if she was experiencing auditory hallucinations, she was surprised when Hyun-woo actually appeared. He scolded her for not wearing comfortable shoes as he had advised and then took out a pair of sneakers from his bag. Hyun-woo tenderly helped her into them, explaining that he knew this place because it was where they had honeymooned. Hyun-woo then confided, "You promised not to make me cry. You told me to trust you. But guess what? I cried a lot during our marriage. I like sleeping separately since I could cry myself to sleep." Haeun replied, "Back then, I just said whatever so I could marry you." Her tears betrayed her true feelings. Haeun deeply wished for Hyun-woo to stay by her side and he felt the same. They didn't say it as if an invisible shield was between them. Haeun reached out her hand, wanting to go home with Hyun-woo. She came here looking for a miracle cure for her dire illness, but found none. Instead, she rediscovered the love Hyun-woo had always held for her, a love she truly wanted. On the other hand, this guy has successfully recovered the video that Hyun-woo asked for, and it turns out the person who opened the iron gate for the wild boar was none other than Soo-hyun's wife. At the same time, she's leading Yoon-seong into Hyun-woo's room. He rummages through everything and discovers a hidden safe but without the password. He can't open it and remains clueless about the secrets it holds inside. Meanwhile, Haeun wants Hyun-woo to make her instant noodles, having never tried them before and wanting to taste them before she dies. At the same time, Haeun wishes for no memorial services after her passing, as she doesn't like any of the traditional dishes. She also desires a beautifully written obituary, sprinkled with a few touching stories about herself. Haeun asks Hyun-woo if he will cry for her, admitting she would feel guilty if he mourns her all his life. However, she would be upset if he forgets her too quickly. Thus, she wants him to regret that she is no longer there. What Haeun says seems to read every thought in Hyun-woo's heart. Haeun also reveals that she had made a will before getting married, compelled to do so by her mother's insistence. In it, Hyun-woo inherits nothing, but Haeun promises to amend it later. However, Hyun-woo doesn't want her to do that now. He wants her to wait until she has fully recovered before revising the will. At night, Haeun casually reminds Hyun-woo that he can sleep wherever he wants now, whether it's on the sofa or somewhere else. After a moment of hesitation, Hyun-woo quickly follows Haeun and tentatively asks, "From today on, can I sleep in your room?" Internally delighted, Haeun plays it cool, pretending to need time to think it over, but eventually, she agrees to let Hyun-woo sleep with her. Right after, it's unclear whether Haeun is praising her husband or teasing him. She remarks, "You wanted to see if I was breathing well, you panicked when I coughed. You didn't care about my will or the fortune you'd get. You stayed up all night worrying about me. That's my husband. You're one of a kind." These comments leave Hyun-woo feeling shaky and uncertain whether Haeun is genuinely complimenting him or subtly referencing his previous thoughts. Now, Hyun-woo is no longer concerned about divorcing Haeun. What he wants is to love his wife like he did before. Hyun-woo also frequently visits the church to pray, hoping that Haeun can overcome this terrible disease. That day, Haeun unexpectedly received news from the hospital's laboratory. They have a method to increase her white blood cells. Although it wasn't guaranteed to succeed, they were willing to try it. Haeun was overjoyed by this good news, unaware that these efforts were due to Hyun-woo's persuasion. Previously, Hyun-woo had confronted the doctor privately, threatening to sue him for fraud. Before starting treatment, Haeun had donated $1 million to the center, yet the doctor had not made any serious efforts to treat her. This constituted fraud, as he had received a substantial financial benefit while essentially gambling with someone's life. Hearing this, the doctor began to reconsider. He decided to try increasing her white blood cells with injections, but acknowledged that he could do nothing more if the treatment failed. Naturally, Hyun-woo accepted this. Meanwhile, After breaking into Hyunwoo's room, Yoon Seung discovered the address of the guy who had restored the video for Hyunwoo. He realized that what Da-hai had done had been recorded, and shortly after, Grace-go showed Da-hai the video. Grace-go reproached Da-hai for acting without observing her surroundings. There were many cars around, so their dash cams recorded everything. If Yoon Seung hadn't discovered and handled the situation in time, both of their lives would have been ruined. It turns out Da-hai was once a scholarship student of Mr. Manday's corporation. Knowing that Soo-cheol was the sole grandson of the chairman, therefore, she approached Soo-cheol from a very young age. When they grew up, the two got married, and of course what she really aimed for was control of Queen's Corporation. At the same time, Grace-go had someone unlock Hyunwoo's safe. She was genuinely surprised to find a pre-drafted divorce agreement inside. That day, Hyunwoo took Hae-in to the hospital for a checkup. She was astonished to find she had gained 3 kilograms. While other patients usually lose weight, she was gaining it. Hae-in feared becoming unattractively heavy. She did not want Hyunwoo to remember her only by that unflattering appearance when she died. Hyunwoo reassured her, "You won't believe me if I said you're pretty no matter your weight, will you?" But Hae-in remained focused on, "I have gained weight." Shortly afterward, Hae-in had to follow the doctor inside for further examination. Suddenly, Hae-in saw a young boy who often appeared in her hallucinations. She followed him unconsciously, but when she stepped outside, she suddenly froze. When Hyunwoo heard from the doctor that Hae-in had disappeared, he immediately rushed to search for her everywhere. Seeing a woman fainting in the street caused him immense worry, so he approached to check, but it wasn't Hae-in. At that moment, Hae-in suddenly appeared from behind, pulling at Hyunwoo's shirt. He breathed a sigh of relief and embraced her tightly. Right after, Hae-in told Hyunwoo that she had seen someone, and that someone was her brother. When she was 9, her family went boating during a summer vacation, and she experienced a very mysterious accident. Hae-in remembered that her brother had saved her, but when they got to shore and she asked her mother, her brother was nowhere to be found. Not long after, his body was discovered not far away. After losing her son, Hae-in's mother blamed her for the incident. She never forgave Hae-in, making her feel as if she had stolen her brother's life. Hae-in believed that when she was close to death, someone who loved her would come to fetch her, and her brother's appearance might be a sign that she was about to face death. However, Hyunwoo thought it was just a hallucination from the medication. He constantly reassured Hae-in that her interpretations were completely wrong. Shortly after, Hyunwoo called the guy he had asked to restore the video, but suddenly couldn't get through. At the same time, he had closed his shop and was preparing to move elsewhere. It seemed like Yoon Seung's influence was the reason for his departure. That evening, Mrs. Soo-hyun unexpectedly discovered a listening device hidden under Mr. Manday's chess table. According to an expert's assessment, the microwave receiver would be within a 2-kilometer radius. Mr. Manday immediately ordered a thorough inspection of every nook and cranny of the house. They discovered the microwave receiver in Hyunwoo's room. All of this was the handiwork of the despicable Yoon Seung. The very next morning, Mrs. Seon-hwa called Hae-in to discuss the matter. Hae-in laughed when her mother suggested that Hyunwoo was the one who placed the listening device. She reasoned that anyone could have left it in the room while they were both away. She urged her mother to check the CCTV footage before accusing Hyunwoo. Hyunwoo called his close friend to check out the store of the guy who had restored the video, but it was already closed down. Sensing something was amiss, Hyunwoo directed Yang Ki to the keys of his car parked nearby, hidden under the right tire. Hyunwoo wanted Yang Ki to send him the memory card from the car's black box. When Hyunwoo got back, Hae-in told him that if her family called, he shouldn't answer, and she even went ahead and turned off his phone. Unable to reach Hyunwoo, Mr. Manday had someone open his safe. Everyone was shocked to find a divorce agreement between him and Hae-in. Now, everything seemed to be against Hyunwoo, and Grace-go was only making things worse. She revealed that Hyunwoo had a close friend working in the law firm of Chairman Yeom, a rival of Chairman Manday, and she suspected that Hyunwoo was collaborating with him. Despite everyone advising Mr. Manday to not jump to conclusions, he was visibly angry and wanted to summon both of them immediately. Later, Hae-in's parents tried to call her, but she didn't bother to pick up the phone. At the same time, Hyunwoo was rushing to meet her. Seeing each other, they were initially overjoyed, but Hae-in's expression changed drastically when she saw the photo of Hyunwoo's divorce agreement that her mother had sent. This moment left Hae-in utterly speechless. She immediately questioned him about the divorce papers, desperately wanting him to deny their authenticity. However, Hyun-woo admitted he had drafted them and apologized for not being able to disclose this earlier. The revelation shattered Haeun's world as Hyun-woo struggled to find the words to explain. Tears welled up in Haeun's eyes as she asked when he had planned to divorce her. He admitted it was from the day she told him about her cancer diagnosis. Because of this, he had kept it a secret until it was exposed. At this point, Haeun realized that Hyun-woo's previous compassion was merely a facade. However, it wasn't all deceit. While it had once been part of Hyun-woo's plan, things had changed. Since arriving in Germany, he had stopped considering divorce, but under these circumstances, Haeun couldn't believe anything he said. Angered, she returned to the hotel, intending to leave immediately. Hyun-woo tried to explain and stop her, but to no avail. Exhausted, Haeun left the hotel coldly, leaving Hyun-woo feeling helpless. Haeun reflected on their past, recalling the loving words and his efforts to protect her, only to realize it was all an act. With her mind in turmoil, she walked numbly, ignoring everything around her and standing in the middle of the road, oblivious to an oncoming truck. Fortunately, Hyun-woo arrived just in time to pull her out of harm's way. He loudly scolded Haeun for her carelessness, but she responded that if it were to happen again, she hoped he wouldn't save her. The next morning, Haeun continued her hospital visits for tests, but her white blood cell count hadn't improved at all. The doctors now had no other options but to wait and hope for a miracle. At this point, their main task was to provide emotional support. Patients like her often think about ending their suffering. The doctor advised Hyun-woo to give her hope, whether through love or hatred, as these feelings could fuel her fight for life. Knowing that the treatment here was ineffective, Haeun wanted to return to South Korea. Seeing his wife's condition worried Hyun-woo that she might consider something drastic. As the doctor suggested, he needed to give her a reason to live, so Hyun-woo began to provoke hatred in her. He vowed to become a despicable husband that Haeun could curse or even plan revenge against. Hyun-woo provocatively said, "I'd be grateful if you divorced me without filing a suit." He confessed that living with her had been truly exhausting. He had felt a sense of relief when he heard she might soon pass away. If they could endure for 3 more months, they would divorce amicably. Unfortunately, everything had been exposed and fallen apart. Hearing this, Haeun couldn't stay calm. She steeled herself to make Hyun-woo pay, determined not to let the divorce be easy. Surely, this was also what he secretly desired her to do. At the same time, Yoon Se-young signed a contract with Soo-cheol to build a luxury resort. However, Soo-cheol was unaware that the project was fraught with irregularities. Yoon Se-young's plan was to gradually take over the Queen's Corporation. Moreover, he intended to incriminate the entire family by accusing them of embezzling company funds. After returning to South Korea, Haeun signed a divorce agreement with Hyun-woo. Her mother, Mrs. Sean-hwa, strongly supported her daughter's decision. Mr. Byung-jun couldn't understand why Hyun-woo had initiated the divorce. He was convinced that his son-in-law was having an affair and wanted to investigate, but Haeun opposed this, as she wanted to find out everything herself. She would investigate whether he had misappropriated funds privately. If she found any evidence of embezzlement, she would immediately report it and demand compensation for damages. Seeing Haeun so assertive surprised everyone. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo confided in his close friend that Haeun knew everything, but he couldn't understand why she didn't explode in anger, only shedding tears. These tears drove Hyun-woo nearly mad. He had wanted to see her lash out at him, but that hadn't happened. Hyun-woo was well aware that Haeun was plotting revenge, which he was anticipating and willing to accept if it meant she could ruin his life. She needed a motive to focus on that, as Hyun-woo didn't want to witness Haeun neglecting herself. Immediately afterwards, Hyun-woo approached Mr. Mende to clarify everything, denying any involvement in placing a listening device in his room. Hyun-woo rejected accusations of setting up Team Leader Song for embezzling funds or acting as a pawn for Chairman Yame. He suggested that Director Jo was the one who approved the embezzlement files of Team Leader Song, with the independent auditor of Queen's Corporation right by his side. Hyun-woo asserted that these two had colluded and turned a blind eye to Song's corruption. Moreover, he believed that besides them, there was another person involved, and that individual was the one who planted the listening device in Mr. Mende's room. All of their conversations had been captured by Yoon Se-young through a hidden camera in Mr. Mende's room, prompting him to call Director Jo to reveal this information. Yoon Seung advised him to flee because Hyun-woo was preparing to target him. Back in their room, Hae-in showed Hyun with a signed divorce agreement, but she stressed that when and how to file, it was her decision alone. Hae-in revealed that she had hired a competent lawyer and warned him not to dream of a peaceful departure. Hyun-woo wasn't concerned about that, but his final piece of advice to Hae-in was to keep her distance from Yoon Seung. Hyun-woo was convinced that Yoon Seung had ulterior motives, especially after suddenly offering a substantial investment to Soo-hyun and Hae-in. Through the black box data, Hyun-woo had seen Yoon Seung appearing in front of the data recovery shop, and soon after, the shop owner and the footage from the shooting range also mysteriously disappeared. Hyun-woo believed that Yoon Seung was involved in these events, but Hae-in dismissed his concerns. The next morning, Hae-in donned a striking red outfit to go to the office, causing everyone to be incredibly anxious as they sensed something big was about to happen. Due to her nerves, a staff member accidentally spilled coffee in front of Hae-in, but surprisingly, she did not react angrily as usual. Hae-in dismissed the mishap as trivial, as she was currently more infuriated with something else: her husband, Hyun-woo. At the same time, Hae-in was having people gather documents from his department, investigating all financial reports to date. When Hyun-woo arrived at the office, he found his room completely empty, and he fully understood what was happening. Meanwhile, the maid cleaning Hae-in's room discovered a hospital bill and quickly sent it to Yoon Seung. He immediately instructed his contacts to get in touch with Sungmin Hospital to check on an important matter. Over the past few days, Mr. Byung-jun's people had been keeping an eye on Hyun-woo, but they hadn't noticed anything unusual. The places he visited were mundane, and he was always alone without any lover around. That day, Secretary Na showed Hae-in the audit results, which revealed no signs of Hyun-woo embezzling money. Even a check of his account showed minimal spending, except for a peculiar recurring expense of 300,000 won at a flower shop. Promptly, Hae-in and Secretary Na went to that flower shop. Secretary Na managed to obtain the name and address of the recipient of the flowers. Her name was Kim Min-ji. Hearing the name of another woman made Hae-in uneasy, as she really wanted to know whom Hyun-woo was buying flowers for. However, when they arrived at the address, it turned out to be a funeral home, and the girl, Kim Min-ji, was an employee in their company. Hae-in's initial jealousy faded, and she felt embarrassed and sympathetic toward her employee. According to Secretary Na, Hyun-woo had sent the condolence flowers under Hae-in's name, which slightly moved Secretary Na. Outside, when Hae-in encountered Hyun-woo, instead of appreciation, she turned to reproach him. Hae-in believed that no matter what he did, she would not forget the things he had done to her. He had abandoned her when she was most vulnerable, which she found despicable and something she could never forgive. That evening, Hae-in had a meeting with Yoon Seung. After discussing the business deal involving Hersana, Hae-in expressed her concerns. She asked him, "What do you want? I know I owe you one. I feel uneasy since you're not asking me for a favor." Yoon Seung confidently replied, "Divorce back Hyun-woo. That's what I want." Hae-in was at a loss for words with this despicable request. Yoon Seung then added, "What if I replaced him?" Upon hearing this, Hae-in lost all interest in continuing their dinner. She angrily stood up and left. Outside, Hae-in suddenly felt dizzy. She searched her purse, but couldn't find her pain medication. Meanwhile, a close friend revealed something strange about Yoon Seung to Hyun-woo. Yoon Seung's adoptive parents weren't wealthy, but after they adopted him, they moved to a larger house and even afforded to send him to an expensive school. Sometime later, Yoon Seung's adoptive parents died in a drunk driving accident, yet oddly, neither had a history of alcohol addiction. At the same time, Hyun-woo returned home to find Hae-in feeding a cat. Worried she might catch a cold, he quickly draped his coat over her. Hyun-woo asked Hae-in why she was sitting outside, but now Hae-in couldn't remember anything, nor could she explain why she was there. Hae-in seemed like a completely different person, smiling at Hyun-woo and forgetting the events that had happened before. Hyun-woo was stunned by Hae-in's condition, especially since she didn't even remember just returning from Germany. She kept repeating, "There's a 51% chance I can go to Germany and receive treatment." Hyun-woo teared up, realizing that Hae-in's condition was worsening, continuously apologizing while she remained unaware of what had transpired. They embraced tightly, and Hae-in declared her love for Hyun-woo carefreely, which made him cry even more. However, this romantic moment couldn't last forever, and Hyun-woo eventually revealed everything to Hae-in. Despite the difficulty, he felt compelled to be honest. He no longer wanted to deceive Hae-in. Hyun-woo confessed, "We already went to Germany. I was going to divorce you without telling you first. And you found out in Germany. So it's been rocky for us lately." Hyun-woo's confession left Hae-in astonished. She kept insisting he was lying to her. Eventually, Hae-in remembered everything. She recalled their arguments and Hyun-woo mentioning divorce. Now that she remembered everything, Hae-in couldn't forgive Hyun-woo and felt even more outraged than before. Hae-in decided their relationship should end and took the initiative to say they should get divorced. The next morning, Hae-in began arranging for a divorce attorney to come over, seemingly determined to handle everything strictly this time. Both sides planned to discuss the most reasonable grounds for divorce, but Hyun-woo voluntarily left it to Hae-in to decide the reasons. Hyun-woo wouldn't regret this decision. As for him, any reason given wouldn't truly justify the divorce anyway. Hae-in reviewed photos that her father had someone take of Hyun-woo, showing him often eating alone, playing baseball, and jogging. Thus, Hae-in wanted to engage in those activities just like Hyun-woo, throwing herself into playing baseball like a true enthusiast. After tiring herself out, she visited a restaurant Hyun-woo often frequented. Coincidentally, he was there today, with his close friend. On the other side, Hyun-woo's friend was extolling the benefits of getting divorced. "You no longer have to worry about men tailing you or having to rush home. You had to leave us while drinking if your mother-in-law or the chairman called you. That's why you didn't meet us often, and always had dinner alone." However, Hyun-woo countered that he wanted that life. He accepted everything because he wanted to be with Hae-in. Hearing this stopped Hae-in in her tracks, and for a moment, the two shared a profound emotional connection. Through his contacts, Yoon Se-young learned that Hae-in was suffering from cancer, apparently a malignant tumor. Looking at a necklace, Yoon Se-young was reminded of a memory from years ago. At that time, Hae-in was being chased by a dog. He rushed out to hit the dog to protect her. Seeing his dog injured, the dog's owner came over and started berating Yoon Se-young. Hae-in stood up to protect Yoon Se-young when the owner attempted to hit him. Afterwards, Hae-in also bandaged Yoon Se-young's wounds. When she left, she dropped this necklace, which he picked up and has worn ever since. Later, Yoon Se-young sought out Hae-in and boldly stated, "The one person Queens really needs is me, and I'm also the one you need." Seeing Yoon Se-young persistently cling to her, Hyun-woo plainly stated that she decided to reject the Hersona deal that Yoon Se-young had brought in. Hearing this made him very angry. Yoon Se-young claimed that he needed nothing from the deal and that he was here to help Hae-in, asserting himself as the one who could give her everything that others couldn't. In response, Hae-in said, "I didn't divorce him so you could have a chance. I married Hyun-woo because he said he'd be by my side. And I divorced him because I felt bad about everything he had to go through." That day, Yoon Se-young promised to invest $900 million in Queens Corporation's luxury resort project, wanting to be the sole investor in the project. As Mr. Man-dae was about to seal a deal for cooperation, Hyun-woo suddenly intervened, urging Mr. Man-dae to reconsider. He warned that if there were any issues with the risk to the principal, 6.7% of his shares could end up being transferred to Yoon Se-young. However, Mrs. Soo-hyun had already manipulated Mr. Man-dae's mindset. She had visited a fortune teller who told her that if someone offered him a large sum of money along with some documents, he should agree. This would save both him and the company, while those attempting sabotage would eventually betray him. Recalling Mrs. Soo-hyun's words, Mr. Man-dae ordered Hyun-woo out and decided to sign the contract with Yoon Se-young. Moreover, Mr. Man-dae called in the security team, intending to confiscate all computer equipment in Hyun-woo's office and remove him from the company. Fortunately, Hae-in arrived just in time and dismissed everyone, despite it being the chairman's orders. Hae-in was puzzled as to why Hyun-woo still wanted to stay on even after their divorce. Little did she know, his staying was to protect her. That evening, Mrs. Byung-ya was furious upon learning that Hyun-woo had divorced Hae-in, but he insisted that he wasn't going anywhere and would not abandon Hae-in. He also suspected that someone was trying to harm him and push him out of the house. Due to a personal grudge, Mrs. Byung-ya brought up the name of Mrs. Soo-hyun. Upon further investigation, she discovered that Mrs. Soo-hyun's real name was Sun Jae-on and she had assumed a false identity to infiltrate their household. Moreover, she had a son who was now 34 years old. The next morning, Hyun-woo and Mrs. Byung-ya met with her private detective, who had uncovered that Mrs. Soo-hyun had once been in prison. She gave birth there and sent her child to the Gangwon orphanage. Mrs. Byum Yao was shocked to learn that this was the same place the chairman had supported with donations and scholarships for many years. The three of them then visited the Gangwon orphanage, located near an old hunting ground, but found that it had burned down 10 years ago. According to a local uncle, there was a very smart boy there who had received a scholarship from the Queen's Corporation. However, the boy had once been taken to the police station for killing a neighbor's dog. He was later adopted and sent to the US, and this boy greatly resembled the current Yin Seong. Piecing everything together, Hyun-woo felt there was some connection between Mrs. Soo-hyun and Yoon Seong. At the same time, Mr. Man-dae granted medical power of attorney to Mrs. Soo-hyun. Should anything happen regarding his health, she would make the decisions on his behalf. That day was the celebration of Mr. Man-dae's 80th birthday. He joyfully received well wishes from everyone, unaware of another plan by Yoon Seong and Mrs. Soo-hyun unfolding in the background. Meanwhile, Grace Go sneaked into the security room and had someone disable all the cameras in the building. At the same time, Soo-cheol's wife was making a hasty escape. She and her son were on a flight leaving the area, and after the party ended, Soo-cheol discovered this. He found a letter left by his wife and was deeply distressed by the shocking news. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo had obtained the results of a DNA test confirming that Mrs. Soo-hyun and Yoon Seong were indeed mother and son. Hyun-woo immediately called Mr. Man-dae to reveal this information, but it was already too late. Mr. Man-dae began to suffer a heart attack, with Mrs. Soo-hyun watching smugly. Earlier, she had administered a drug that would paralyze him within 10 minutes. If Mr. Man-dae died, the guardianship document would be useless, so her plan was for him to live in a vegetative state. Mr. Man-dae was subsequently taken to the hospital for treatment, and ironically, none of his children or grandchildren were allowed to visit him. Only the legally appointed guardian had access, and that person was none other than Mrs. Soo-hyun. This news shocked everyone. Her attorney even showed everyone the power of attorney document that Mr. Man-dae had signed. Now, she had the authority to make all decisions while Mr. Man-dae was in a coma. This revelation infuriated Mrs. Byum Yao. She also disclosed to everyone that Yoon Seong was her son. Mrs. Byum Yao was fully aware that this was all a scheme orchestrated by the mother and son duo. Mrs. Soo-hyun affirmed that Yoon Seong was her son, but she argued that it changed nothing. Queen's Corporation was now in Yoon Seong's hands. After various acquisitions, he had amassed 31% of the shares. Yoon Seong was the second largest shareholder after Mr. Man-dae, but with Mr. Man-dae comatose, Yoon Seong was set to take over. The shareholders also agreed to oust the Queen's family, and now a powerful family had completely lost their influence. After being expelled from the corporation, all family members mysteriously disappeared. They had to evade investigations, and even journalists were unaware of their whereabouts. It turned out that Haeun's entire family had retreated to Hyun-woo's house, where they now had to start anew. They were faced with adapting to country life, an experience entirely foreign to a formerly wealthy family. Previously, as Haeun's extended family returned home, they were confronted by a large crowd gathered at the gate. The crowd was protesting to reclaim land after a construction project involving their complex was found to have legal violations. Unsure what to do next, Grace Go called Haeun's mother, suggesting they return through the back gate as it was unguarded. However, this was a setup by Grace Go, who had arranged for reporters to hide there with the intention of secretly photographing the family in their dire circumstances. When the family arrived, Grace Go denied them entry, declaring that the house was now under Mrs. Soo-hyun's management. Grace Go also revealed her true colors by loudly telling Haeun to be quiet so the adults could talk, leaving everyone in shock. Grace Go then ordered a chauffeur to drive off the luxury cars, claiming they belonged to the company. Additionally, everyone's phones and credit cards were confiscated. She had even prepared their luggage, ready to evict everyone from the house. As reporters began filming, a car suddenly arrived, driven by Hyun-woo, Haeun's son-in-law. He urgently told everyone to get in the car due to the presence of many reporters. Safely, he whisked Haeun's entire family away from the scene. Mr. Man-dae had included a transfer clause in the contract, appointing the entire family as joint guarantors, which resulted in all properties, stocks, and bank accounts being frozen. Now, with no refuge available for Haeun's family, Hyun-woo had no choice but to take everyone to his house for sanctuary. Returning to reality, Hyun-woo's family was shocked by the sudden appearance of Haeun's parents. Through the news, Hyun-woo's father was well aware of everyone's situation. Hyun-woo led everyone to the guest house, but Haeun's mother, Mrs. Seon-woo, did not want that. She wished to return to Seoul instead. She turned her back and left despite Mr. Byung-jun's earnest persuasions. Unfortunately, she stepped in a pile of cow dung, which startled her so much that she nearly fell if not for her in-law's support. In the end, no one left, as there was nowhere else to seek shelter. Haeun thanked Hyun-woo for what he did that day but mentioned she only intended to stay temporarily for the night and would move elsewhere the next day. Hyun-woo's continued concern made her uncomfortable, given that they were already divorced. She also stated that whatever happened to her or her family should no longer concern Hyun-woo. However, how could he ignore them? He agreed not to worry about Haeun anymore if she got better, but for now, he wanted to take care of her. During dinner, both families were still quite awkward. Mr. Byung-jun sighed continuously, dismayed by how quickly life had taken such a drastic turn. Soo-cheol could hardly swallow his food, his wife and child having left him. He just wanted to ask everyone for a glass of water to wash down his sorrow. Hyun-woo's brother went to make some tea, but Soo-cheol specifically wanted bottled water, and it had to be mineral water from the Alps. Upon hearing this, Haeun gave her brother a metaphorical slap to snap Soo-cheol out of it, reminding him that they might have to settle for well water now, instead of making extravagant requests. Thinking about that slap from Haeun still sends shivers down Misin's spine. Everyone thinks Hyun will probably often gets hit like that by Haeun. While they were gossiping, Haeun suddenly appeared, causing Misin to be terrified upon seeing her sister-in-law. Misin hoped Haeun wouldn't hold a grudge for calling her a sly fox and mentioned that she actually likes foxes and had that nickname in high school. Misin also brought up Hyun-woo's ex-girlfriend. She recently got a job at a middle school nearby and has been asking for Hyun-woo's number, but Misin refused to give it. In response, Haeun told Misin she could give it out, wished everyone good night and quietly left. Elsewhere, Hyun-woo's father advised Mr. Byung-jun to feel safe staying here, knowing their visit was a secret, so he had informed the villagers not to use the internet. There are also no security cameras around, and almost no one uses smartphones. Mr. Byung-jun just bowed and thanked his old father-in-law for his thoughtful hospitality. Meanwhile, Yoon Seung was furious upon learning that Mrs. Soo-hyun had kicked Haeun's family out of the house. Yet, his primary concern was Haeun and no one else. Mrs. Soo-hyun, understanding her son well, advised Yoon Seung to forget Haeun, suggesting it was time for them both to enjoy the life they always dreamed of. Yoon Seung firmly stated he would bring Haeun back at all costs. What he needed was her and her love. Yoon Seung hadn't had that in many years. Even though Mrs. Soo-hyun regularly sent money for his education, she never once called to check on him. What he really needed was a family warmth, not the material compensation Mrs. Soo-hyun tried to offer. Meanwhile, Haeun took out the music player to listen. She wondered why she and Hyun-woo had such similar music tastes, not knowing that it was her own device from years ago. At the same time, Hyun-woo texted saying, "I need to go to work early tomorrow so I won't be able to see you," but then deleted it and only sent, "Going to work early tomorrow." Both of them had a lot to say, yet they wrote and erased repeatedly, ending up sending curt messages to each other, as if they were strangers. Soon after, Haeun asked Hyun-woo about the music player she liked. He replied that it wasn't his, that he had found it at Hanul Foreign Language High School during high school. On his first day there, Haeun re-examined the music player, noticed an engraving on it and recognized it as hers. She also recalled the fateful day she lost it and that Hyun-woo was the one who bandaged her that day. Haeun couldn't believe the coincidence and wondered if Hyun-woo was meant to be with her. If he knew the girl from that day was her, he'd be shocked. Haeun then asked Hyun-woo why he still had it, questioning whether the girl who dropped it was very beautiful. Fearing jealousy, Hyun-woo rushed to her room to clarify, stating he didn't remember anything. He even joked he couldn't recall if the person who dropped it was male or female, a student or the janitor. He merely kept it without any attachment. Before leaving, Hyun-woo reminded Haeun to close the curtains since the morning sun could disrupt her sleep. But Haeun ignored this and soon drifted off to sleep. The next morning, before heading to the office, Hyun-woo stopped by Haeun's room. Noticing the sunlight on her face, he carefully pulled the curtain shut for her. He tenderly covered Haeun with a blanket and even checked to see if she had a fever. Hyun-woo sat and admired his wife's beautiful face for a moment, and once everything seemed alright, he quietly left the room. A while later, Haeun woke up and went to the kitchen to help her mother-in-law, who asked her to slice some carrots. But for a high-born lady like Hae-in, this task was quite challenging and her chopping technique alarmed her mother-in-law. Consequently, Hae-in ended up just watching her mother-in-law handle everything. Her mother-in-law instructed her patiently, but it was unclear if Hae-in was able to learn anything. Meanwhile, Yoon Se-young began to take over the Queen's conglomerate. He arrived at the company amid a swarm of reporters and journalists. Yoon Se-young was now seeking Mr. Man-dae's secret fund, but no one knew where it was hidden. At the same time, Hyun-woo was also at the chairman's office by Yoon Se-young's summons, as Hyun-woo's remaining at the company was because he was no longer related to Hae-in's family. However, Yoon Se-young disliked seeing Hyun-woo's face and wanted to fire him immediately. Aware of this, Hyun-woo mentioned that he had applied to another company and hoped Yoon Se-young would give him some time to sort things out. Yoon Se-young inquired about Hae-in's whereabouts, but Hyun-woo pretended to know nothing about where she might be. After Grace Go became of no further use to him, Yoon Se-young wanted to get rid of her. He instructed her to close all her spa stores and pack up to live abroad. After days of investigation, Hyun-woo found an employee who could restore data. He was caught because of issues related to transferring his daughter to another school. Hyun-woo then obtained a video from the shooting range showing that President Man-dae's sister-in-law, Da-hai, was the perpetrator. Simultaneously, she sent a letter to Soo-hyun confessing that she had stolen valuable jewelry before fleeing. Da-hai also revealed that the child wasn't Soo-hyun's, mocking him for being foolish enough not to suspect anything, leaving Soo-hyun in tears over this revelation. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo was planning to reclaim the Queen's conglomerate. Yoon Se-young had seized it through illegitimate means, and now Hyun-woo intended to use those tactics against him. Seeing people protesting outside the company, Hyun-woo stepped out to calm them down, but ended up being pelted with raw eggs. Meanwhile, Mr. Byung-jun was constantly calling his close friends to borrow money, but no one answered or was willing to help him at this time. That night, Secretary Na called Hae-in to inform her about Hyun-woo being pelted with raw eggs by protesters. Soon after, Hae-in experienced a hallucination and then fainted. When Hae-in regained consciousness, she was already inside the house. She claimed that her dizziness was due to sleep deprivation, and was determined to keep her illness a secret. Upon hearing about Hae-in's fainting, Hyun-woo hurried home and pulled her aside to discuss her condition. He had called the doctor and wanted Hae-in to see him the next day. At this moment, Hae-in also criticized Hyun-woo for the recent issues at the company that Secretary Na had just revealed. Hyun-woo explained that it was a real estate investment scam, where brokers bought land from owners and inflated the price fivefold. They then contracted with Queens at only a third of the price, which was fraudulent, and Hyun-woo intended to prove it. By the time Hyun-woo arrived at the location, the broker had fled, planning to leave the country in a few days. He needed to convince the landowners to sue the broker before he could escape. Meanwhile, Yoon Se-young entered Hae-in's bedroom to check, and he discovered a card from Sungmin Hospital in her wallet. The next day, Hyun-woo took Hae-in to the hospital for a white blood cell injection. She covered her face completely so that no one could recognize her. At the same time, Yoon Se-young was also at the hospital, using his influence to check Hae-in's medical records. He was shocked to learn that she only had 3 months to live. He immediately sought out the doctor to inquire about this, but since Yoon Se-young was not Hae-in's legal guardian, the doctor could not disclose any information. After the injection, Hae-in left. Outside, Hyun-woo unexpectedly showed up worried about her. The doctor had just called him when Yoon Se-young arrived. That night, Yoon Se-young visited Mrs. Soo-hyun at the hospital where Mr. Man-dae was admitted. She wanted her son to announce to the press that she would take over the department store company. Yoon Se-young objected because that position belonged to Hae-in and he would do everything to bring her back despite Mrs. Soo-hyun's efforts to stop him. Mrs. Soo-hyun responded that Mr. Man-dae was still alive, which meant she still had a say in the Queen's corporation and she wouldn't let Yoon Se-young do whatever he wanted. Later, when she returned, Mr. Man-dae was no longer there. She called Yoon Se-young, knowing her son had taken him away. Yoon Se-young admitted to this because his goals did not align with hers. Despite Mrs. Soo-hyun's desperate screams, Yoon Se-young remained firm with his plan. Mr. Man-dae was taken out of the hospital in an ambulance, seemingly beginning to regain consciousness as his fingers started to move. Meanwhile, as Hyun-woo was on his way home, he realized someone was following him, so he quickly turned and fled. However, the pursuer relentlessly chased after Hyun-woo and finally blocked his car on a bridge. The pursuer was the land broker, who had scammed the locals. He demanded Hyun would drop the lawsuit, but Hyun Woo couldn't possibly comply. Without a word, the broker signaled his men to handle Hyun Woo, but Hyun Woo was no ordinary man. He had once been a renowned boxer. He single-handedly fought off the thugs, knocking each one down in moments. He then subdued the ringleader, and seeing this, the remaining goons scattered in fear. Meanwhile, Haein was anxiously waiting at home for Hyun Woo, peering out and calling him, but he didn't answer his phone. Just then, the despicable Yoon Seong unexpectedly showed up. Haein panicked upon seeing him. Yoon Seong revealed that he had seen Haein's medical records and wanted to become her guardian to help manage her treatment. He also knew that Haein was hiding her condition from her family because she did not want them to suffer, as they had already lost a son. Yoon Seong pressured Haein to return to her position at the company, threatening that if she didn't, he would cause her loved one's pain. He asserted that he was the only one who could save her now. At the same time, Soo-hyun was also present and visibly furious. He rushed to confront Yoon Seong, but it was almost comical. Soo-hyun was berating himself for falling for Yoon Seong's deceit. He then asked Yoon Seong about Da-hai's whereabouts, wanting to know if she was alright, but Yoon Seong coldly walked away without saying a word. Soo-hyun wondered why he had come in the first place. Haein didn't explain and asked her brother to keep this matter secret from their parents. Back at home, Yoon Seong immediately called Da-hai. He instructed her to delete all her phone numbers, emails and social media accounts and to avoid any contact for the time being. Da-hai was worried about Soo-hyun and wanted to ask about his condition, but Yoon Seong lied, saying Soo-hyun was furious with her. He threatened that Soo-hyun would make her pay if he found her, so she should remain hidden. Meanwhile, Haein noticed the bruises on Hyun Woo's face and pulled him into the room to inquire. Without letting him respond, Haein began to undress Hyun Woo to check his injuries. Seeing the bruises on his back, she asked if he had been beaten up. Fearing she would worry, he denied it, claiming he was fine, but Haein saw right through him. Eventually, Hyun Woo confessed everything to her, explaining how he had fought alone against the land brokers gang, who had clubs while he was unarmed. Concerned for Hyun Woo, Haein advised him to run if such a situation arose again and insisted he promise her that, but he couldn't make such a promise. Hyun Woo stated he could only make promises involving her, otherwise, he would ignore everything else. However, Haein felt that since they were no longer a couple, he should take care of himself more. The next morning, Soo-hyun intended to inform Hyun Woo about Yoon Seong's visit, but Haein's sudden appearance and her piercing gaze made Soo-hyun hold back. Before Hyun Woo left for work, Haein tenderly applied ointment to his wounds and cautioned him to drive carefully. Haein suddenly transformed into a gentle wife, which felt unfamiliar to Hyun Woo. He had barely driven a distance when he decided to turn back, claiming he would wait another 5 minutes due to rush hour traffic. In reality, he just didn't want to leave his charming wife. They ended up sitting together at the village convenience store, sharing a conversation. Haein pondered what life would have been like if they had never married, cherishing the sweet memories from their early romance. Hyun Woo might have met someone kinder and warmer, and they would have lived happily. However, Hyun Woo felt differently. If we had broken up, you probably wouldn't have known how I was doing, but I would have known what you were up to, and I probably would have been regretful. Even if he knew their relationship would end like this, Hyun Woo would still choose to marry Haein. He regretted not being more inquisitive about his wife's life. Despite his deep wishes, he couldn't bring himself to close the emotional distance, which was his regret. Meanwhile, Mrs. Soo-hyun wanted Yoon Seong to bring Mr. Man-dae back and then discuss with him about bringing Haein back into the fold. However, that wasn't all Yoon Seong desired. He planned to marry Haein and would stop at nothing to achieve his goal. When Hyun Woo arrived at the company, he was dismissed for abuse of power, exactly what Yoon Seong wanted. Hyun Woo had no choice but to pack up and leave. Yoon Seong openly revealed that he had met Haein the previous night. Hyun Woo was slightly worried but maintained his composure. He also informed Yoon Seong that the real estate broker Seong K had been arrested last night, and Hyun Woo promised to expose all the truths behind this broker. At the same time, Mrs. Soo-hyun assigned Grace Go the task of locating Mr. Man-dae. In return, Grace Go would not be sent abroad and would also secure a directorial position in the conglomerate. Mrs. Yeo learned through a detective that her father had gone missing, taken somewhere by the despicable Yoon Seong, and even Mrs. Soo-hyun was unaware of his current whereabouts. Mrs. Yeo planned to return to Seoul to search for her father. Upon receiving the news of Mr. Manday's disappearance, Hyun-woo approached Grace Go. To intimidate her, he revealed that her spa branches were unregistered and she was evading a significant amount of taxes. Grace Go, a bit worried, agreed to cooperate but on the condition that Hyun would pay her a sum of money. As soon as she finished speaking, Mrs. Byung-ya also arrived. She declared she wouldn't pay a dime, but would resort to force if they did not cooperate. Meanwhile, Mrs. Seon-woo visited a cafe in the village but forgot that her card had been frozen. The waitress tried repeatedly to swipe it to no avail. In a difficult situation, Hyun-woo's mother stepped in to pay, not as a gift but with a condition. Subsequently, Mrs. Seon-woo had to go to the fields to help Hyun-woo's mother, humbling herself over a cup of coffee from a prestigious lady to a field helper. At the same time, Secretary Na approached Hae-in and revealed that Hyun-woo had been suspended for abuse of power. Hae-in immediately called Yoon Seung, who didn't hesitate to admit that he was framing Hyun-woo. Moreover, he was pondering which crime to pin on Hyun-woo. Hearing this, Hae-in could only curse at this despicable man. That evening, Hyun-woo asked Hae-in about Yoon Seung's visit, wanting to know what he had said. Hae-in replied that he wanted her to return to work and come back home. Hyun-woo was furious. "Does he want to live with you? You two aren't together." Hae-in responded that their situation was similar, not really husband and wife anymore but still living together. Then Hae-in inquired about his pending suspension for abuse of power. She feared Yoon Seung might forge his signature on some document, possibly related to embezzlement or some illegal activity. Hae-in was upset that Hyun-woo kept enduring everything pointlessly for her. She decided to find her own solutions and didn't want Hyun-woo always throwing himself in harm's way to protect her. That day, Hyun-woo's mother accidentally overheard Hae-in's phone conversation with her doctor, stunned to hear her daughter-in-law mention a tumor. She went to Hyun-woo to ask about it. Realizing he could no longer keep it a secret, he confided everything to his mother. Hyun-woo asked her to look after Hae-in in his absence and also requested her to keep the secret from Hae-in's family. Afterward, Hyun-woo's mother sat crying alone, pondering Hae-in's situation. Hyun-woo's father mistakenly thought she was crying over him, so he didn't dare to ask her about it. He shared his thoughts with Mi-sin, believing his wife was sad because he had stopped being the village head. However, Mi-sin thought it was absurd, as she usually heard her mother express relief that her father had quit that role. That day, Hae-in decided to return to Seoul. Since there were no taxis available, Hyun-woo's mother had to drive her to the main road using a tractor. On their way, Hae-in expressed her gratitude for everything and her mother-in-law shed tears as if saying a farewell before crossing to the other side. Upon her return to Seoul, Hae-in immediately headed to the company, walking into the astonishment of everyone. Yoon Seung happily greeted Hae-in upon her return, but Hae-in was not back because of Yoon Seung's threats, but because of his earlier promises. Yoon Seung then took Hae-in to the press conference room for her induction ceremony. Hyun-woo, learning of this, rushed to stop her. However, Hae-in insisted that she would find her own solutions, and this was her way. Hae-in subtly let Hyun-woo know that her return was part of her own plan. At the press conference, Yoon Seung denied accusations of betrayal towards Mr. Manday, such as evicting his family or seizing their assets. To prove his point, Yoon Seung announced the appointment of Mr. Manday's niece as the new director of Queen's department store. He then invited Hae-in to speak at the ceremony. At this moment, Hae-in turned the tables on him. She revealed to everyone that Yoon Seung had threatened her, also threatening to imprison her husband, Hyun-woo, and she had audio recordings to prove her claims. Additionally, she declared that she could not accept the position, knowing she had little time left to live. While Yoon Seung was caught off guard, Hyun-woo teared up at Hae-in's words below. Hae-in did likewise, always looking towards him, indicating the sacrifices she was unwilling to let Hyun-woo make for her. After exposing the true face of Yoon Seung, Hae-in began to feel dizzy. She started having hallucinations in a dreamlike environment, and soon fainted into Hyun-woo's arms. She was immediately rushed to the emergency room, and even in her comatose state, visions of her husband Hyun-woo filled her mind. Hae-in never had any resentment towards him. Instead, she silently thanked Hyun-woo for being by her side throughout the years. It was for Hyun-woo that she wished to live longer, tirelessly seeking every possible treatment at quality medical centers to combat her dreadful disease. Upon hearing the news, both Hyun-woo's and Hae-in's families were devastated and rushed to the hospital, shocked to learn about the illness she had tried to hide. Hae-in's mother was particularly overwhelmed, seeing her daughter in such a condition. Despite having distanced herself from Haein after the loss of her son, deep down, she couldn't bear the thought of losing another child. Meanwhile, Grace Go and Mrs. Byum-ya discovered a location where Yoon-sung and his mother had hidden Mr. Man-dae. When they arrived, they found Mrs. Sul-hee also present. Mrs. Byum-ya begged her for a chance to see Mr. Man-dae, apologizing for her previous rudeness. Mrs. Sul-hee agreed, allowing Mrs. Byum-ya a brief visit with the condition that she must leave immediately afterward. Now awake, Mr. Man-dae appeared not to recognize anyone, a fact that Mrs. Sul-hee relished as it played into her plans. On the other side, Hyun-woo remained steadfastly by Haein's side, clutching her hand tightly as tears fell. He wished fervently for a miracle for her. The following morning, as Haein began to awaken, her first words to Hyun-woo were, "I've loved you from the moment we met until now." She also apologized to Hyun-woo for leaving him to fend for himself, bearing the brunt of her family's issues. Haein wanted to express her innermost thoughts to Hyun-woo, fearing that he would never know them if she were no longer there. Tears welled up in Hyun-woo's eyes as he listened to his wife, replying, "I said I'd do nothing but cry every day, drink a ton of alcohol, sleep on the street, and live recklessly if you died." He then embraced Haein tightly, reassuring her repeatedly, "You won't die. I won't let you." Everyone was overjoyed upon hearing that Haein had regained consciousness. Mr. Byum-jun tried to comfort his daughter by mentioning his many doctor friends, though in reality, they had already turned their backs on him. He always smiled and never blamed Haein for keeping her condition secret. Meanwhile, Mrs. Sianhwa couldn't face her daughter, blaming herself for not fulfilling her role as a mother. She had vented her frustrations on Haein, never responding to her gestures of affection. Now, deeply regretful of her actions, she considered herself a terrible mother, even blaming herself for Haein's illness. Haein, who had overheard everything, loudly rebuked her mother, insisting that none of this was her fault. The situation had nothing to do with how her mother treated her, but Mrs. Sianhwa continued to apologize profusely for being a neglectful mother. At the same time, Mrs. Soo-hee brought Mr. Man-dae to a shareholder meeting, tenderly feeding him porridge spoon by spoon to show her devotion to everyone. She then declared that no one except herself would care for him, ensuring that she and Mr. Man-dae would never part. At the meeting, she demanded that all drafts be sent to her instead of Yoon-sung and sought a meeting with the media team to counteract the criticism the new board was facing. On the other side, investors were furious about the press conference from the previous day, concerned that the exit point will be delayed due to the plummeting stocks. Now, Yoon-sung aimed to uncover a secret fund to silence them. Through his team's investigation, Yoon-sung discovered that the money was in an investment bank in Malaysia. The news of Haein's divorce had flooded the media, sparking curiosity and leading people to speculate that Haein still loved her ex-husband. Wanting to dispel such thoughts, Haein asked Hyun-woo to publicly display his affection for her. Hyun-woo then knelt before Haein, looking at her with deep affection. Haein also requested Hyun-woo to act more romantically. Without hesitation, he complied to demonstrate to everyone that he was the one who wanted to get back with Haein. Just as they were enacting this romantic scene, Yoon-sung unexpectedly appeared, continuing to advise Haein to return home after being discharged. But how could she? Haein, fully aware of the public relations trouble Yoon-sung was facing, warned him, "Provoke me again, and you'll lose something even bigger." Here, Yoon-sung attempted to express his feelings for Haein, but she immediately rejected him, uninterested in his sentiments. Yoon-sung then suggested that everything he did was to get closer to Haein, but how could she accept someone who pushed her into a pit only to pull her out? Haein made it clear to Yoon-sung that the person she needed now was Hyun-woo, only Hyun-woo and no one else. Immediately afterwards, Yoon-sung confronted Hyun-woo, shamelessly demanding that he stay away from Haein, in return offering him what he needed. Hyun-woo felt like punching him for those disgraceful words, but he didn't want to dirty his hands. However, when Yoon-sung instigated further, he ended up taking a punch. Hyun-woo also made it clear to Yoon-sung that he wasn't going anywhere and would always be by Haein's side, so he should not expect anything and just leave. Back in their room, Hyun-woo discussed the corporate matters with Haein, both fully aware that Yoon-sung was currently trying to find Mr. Man-dae's secret fund. According to Hyun-woo's investigation, the fund was not in Malaysia, knowing Yoon-sung had sent people there, but they came back empty-handed. He knew this thanks to the shareholders at the company, who were dissatisfied with the current situation but couldn't express it. They disclosed this to Hyun-woo because they cared about the future of Queens and didn't want to see the company they had been dedicated to for many years fall apart. Hyun-woo did everything for the same reasons, for Queens and knowing how much Hae-in loved her company. That morning, Hyun-woo organized a meeting with his in-laws and also invited Grace Go to discuss matters. There, Hyun-woo mentioned Mr. Manday's secret fund, which amounted to 900 billion won, and he believed it was in South Korea. After being laundered through 5 companies in different countries, it had ultimately returned here, and Hyun-woo suspected it was now in the hands of Mrs. Soo-hyun. However, Grace Go disagreed, as she had overheard Mrs. Soo-hyun asking Mr. Manday about the fund and it seemed she still didn't know where it was. Grace Go suspected that the money might be in a warehouse in the outskirts of Gyeonggi province, rented unusually by director Jin of Queen's Galaxy. Immediately, everyone headed to this warehouse. There, they discovered that the warehouse was storing paintings secretly consigned. Everyone wanted to see these paintings right away. At the same time, Hyun-woo hired an worker to infiltrate and steal data. A while later, when the manager returned to the control room and saw the computer turned off, he assumed it was broken. Hyun-woo and Hae-in managed to escape outside where it began to rain. He covered her with his jacket and told her to wait there while he fetched the car. Shortly after, Yoon-sung appeared unexpectedly with an umbrella, but a hallucination made Hae-in see him as Hyun-woo. Without any suspicion, Hae-in followed who she thought was Hyun-woo. When the real Hyun-woo turned around and saw Hae-in getting into the car, he immediately chased after them. After a tense pursuit, he managed to stop Yoon-sung's car. Hae-in was shocked to see another Hyun-woo and realized that the person beside her was actually Yoon-sung. She couldn't understand how she had mistaken him. Hae-in tried to get out of the car, but Yoon-sung had locked the doors, asking her, "Are you going to tell him that you got in my car after mistaking me for him? He'll be shocked." Despite Yoon-sung's words, Hae-in insisted on getting out. However, later, she did not reveal to Hyun-woo that she had hallucinated Yoon-sung as him. Instead, she explained, "I ran into Yoon-sung earlier, and he invited me back home. You know, I've wanted to see grandfather." Hyun-woo wanted to accompany her, but Yoon-sung stated that the invitation was only for Hae-in, not including Hyun-woo. Reluctantly, Hyun-woo allowed her to go with Yoon-sung. After they left, someone attacked Hyun-woo, leaving him unconscious. When he awoke, he found himself bound, with the real estate scammer standing next to him. Back at the house, Yoon-sung immediately had dinner prepared for Hae-in, and he received a call confirming that the real estate broker had taken care of everything. Dining with Yoon-sung made Hae-in very uncomfortable. She repeatedly asserted she wasn't hungry and had no appetite. All she wanted was for Yoon-sung to take her to see her grandfather, but he wanted to do something first. Yoon-sung presented a necklace that Hae-in had lost years ago during an incident when he saved her from an aggressive dog. At that moment, Hae-in realized that the child from back then was Yoon-sung, but he claimed it wasn't their first meeting. Yoon-sung told a fabricated story about rescuing Hae-in from drowning years ago. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo's mother was looking through old photos of her son, sharing with Hae-in's mother how handsome and talented Hyun-woo had been since childhood. He once even saved a kid from drowning, she mentioned while looking at a beach photo, which reminded Hae-in's mother of a past family accident. Yoon-sung had previously rattled a made-up story about saving Hae-in from drowning, which she partly believed, unaware that it was actually Hyun-woo who had saved her. Now, Yoon-sung's desire was to have dinner with Hae-in, and she complied with his wish. After the meal, Yoon-sung led Hae-in to meet Mr. Manday. She then requested to have a private conversation with her grandfather. Outside, Mrs. Soo-hyun was furious to learn that her son had brought Hae-in to meet Mr. Manday, but Yoon-sung dismissed concerns, claiming Mr. Manday was already confused, so it didn't matter. Hae-in then stepped out of the room, confronting Mrs. Soo-hyun with provocative words, blaming Mrs. Soo-hyun for the state her family was in. Hae-in hurriedly left the house. Yoon-sung tried to follow but lost sight of her, as she panicked to the extent of forgetting where the main gate was. Surprisingly, Hyun-woo was present in this situation. Seeing him, Hae-in could hardly believe her eyes and asked his name again to make sure. Noticing a wound on Hyun-woo's forehead, Hae-in wanted to know what had happened to him. Hyun-woo casually mentioned, "I can even handle 3 guys at once." This boast reassured Hae-in that he really was her husband. Meanwhile, Yoon-sung is watching through CCTV and has seen everything. Earlier, Hyun-woo had used legal threats against the real estate broker, claiming he was now nothing but a fraudster. However, if the broker tried to eliminate him, he'd face murder charges, so police likely targeting him first due to an ongoing assault investigation. Hearing this, the broker began to fear betraying Yoon-sung. Yoon-sung is now furious because everything has fallen apart. His plan to eliminate Hyun-woo and his efforts to win over the person he loves have all gone to ruin. Mrs. Soo-hyun, observing the chaos, remarked to Yoon-sung, "Hyun doesn't care about you. She's always using you." To which Yoon-sung retorted, "I was always used by you too." But Mrs. Soo-hyun insisted she never abandoned him, knowing the orphanage director had mistreated her son, so she had the orphanage burned down and sent the director to her demise. She was aware that Yoon-sung's foster parents mistreated him despite receiving substantial payments from her, so she arranged an accident that took their lives. Mrs. Soo-hyun had always covertly protected Yoon-sung, aiming to make everything belong to her son. She vowed to make anyone obstructing Yoon-sung pay, even if it were Hyun. It turns out Mr. Man-dae was never confused. He never swallowed the pills that Mrs. Soo-hyun gave him. When the servants left, he would spit them out and carefully hide them so no one could find them. That night, the investigation into Mr. Man-dae's secret fund continued, and considering the amount involved, a large enough warehouse was needed to store it. Hyun-woo had checked the building's plans and found no secret basement, but Hyun remembered something her grandfather had mentioned that night. Mr. Man-dae had said, "Lady, come to my house if a war breaks out. We have an air raid shelter." Mr. Byung-jun also recalled his father mentioning building a panic room, but didn't know where it was located. At the same time, Da-hai and her child unexpectedly returned to look for Soo-cheol, who couldn't contain his emotion upon seeing his wife and child. Da-hai returned the stolen items and apologized to everyone. Mrs. Seon-woo was very angry at her daughter-in-law's betrayal. She didn't want to see Da-hai in the house, but Soo-cheol strongly defended his wife. He even insisted that the boy was his son. "I cut his umbilical cord, sang lullabies to him every night, and bathed him myself." Ji-yeon said dad before he could even say mom. The next morning, Hyun playfully tried on a ring from Hyun-woo's pocket, smiling because he still remembered her ring size. Just then, Hyun-woo walked in and Hyun quickly hid the ring, knowing he planned to return it to the store following her earlier advice. She awkwardly removed the ring from her finger and put it back in its place, surprising Hyun-woo, while Hyun claimed she was just trying it on for a moment. Hyun-woo was delighted that Hyun still cared about his proposal, but Hyun felt guilty for not being able to hide her true feelings. After a day of investigation, Hyun-woo discovered that the elevator serving Mr. Man-dae's floor was unusually configured with doors on both the front and back, the rear door possibly leading to a secret room. However, gaining entry to the house to check was a challenge. Additionally, Hyun-woo learned that since Mr. Man-dae had returned home from the hospital, he hasn't been receiving any mandatory treatments like rehabilitation or memory training. Hyun-woo suggested, "We can report them for confinement and enter the house with the police." Meanwhile, Mrs. Soo-hyun discovered that Mr. Man-dae hadn't been taking his medication and also realized he had regained his clarity of mind, noticing his recent strange behavior. She promised to let him go if he disclosed the location of the secret fund, but Mr. Man-dae remained silent, not revealing anything. Late that night, Mr. Man-dae woke up, took the pen Hyun had given him, and slowly walked to the staircase where he tragically took his own life. The next morning, the police were at the scene, concluding that Mr. Man-dae died from a broken neck. Mrs. Byung-ya was inconsolable upon seeing her father being carried out, and everyone was stunned by his sudden demise. Following Mr. Man-dae's death, there was much speculation about Queen's Corporation. His death invalidated Mrs. Soo-hyun's authority. His entire estate was to be transferred according to a will that had been notarized. Mrs. Byung-ya demanded that Mrs. Soo-hyun pack up and leave immediately. However, Mrs. Soo-hyun deceitfully insisted that now was not the time to discuss such matters, suggesting that everyone should take Mr. Man-dae to his favorite house one more time. As everyone held his portrait and entered the house, they arrived at the elevator, which, just as Hyun-woo had predicted, had two doors. He pressed a button next to the handle, revealing a secret room, leaving everyone in the family shocked by the scene before them. Everyone arrived too late. The room was empty. It seemed that Mrs. Soo-hyun and her son had left earlier. Hyun quietly entered her grandfather's room, where she found the pen she had given him earlier. Inside the pen was a voice recorder, and she heard her grandfather's voice, expressing his desire to speak directly to her. Mr. Man-dae admitted that he was occasionally lucid for very brief periods, but could do nothing more. He blamed himself for being greedy, having wasted most of his life just to make money. Now reflecting on his life, Mr. Man-dae felt deep regret and wanted his family to live differently. His final message to them was an apology. Seeing her grandfather's funeral made Hae-in think about her own imminent future, as the remaining 3 months of her life drew closer. She didn't want her family to have to cry at her funeral, and above all, she desperately wanted to continue living. Meanwhile, Mrs. Soo-hyun was leading Yoon-sung to the location where the money was kept. She had taken all the money from Mr. Man-dae's house to this place, an amount so vast that even Yoon-sung was taken aback. It turned out that Mrs. Soo-hyun had accidentally discovered a secret room earlier through a video Mr. Man-dae had recorded himself. With this money, she believed it would protect Yoon-sung and was what she always intended to provide for her son. That day, the hospital in Germany contacted Hyun-woo to share some promising news. Hae-in could undergo surgery. However, they warned of a serious complication: she would completely lose her memory. Hyun-woo disclosed everything to his father and father-in-law. Knowing that Hae-in would never consent to the surgery if she knew about the memory loss, everyone agreed to keep it a secret given her limited time left. The family was overjoyed at the news of her potential recovery, unaware of the dire complication. Hae-in, elated by the news, repeatedly confirmed it with Hyun-woo. Her joy was so overwhelming that she cried tears of relief outside in the yard, feeling at peace for the first time in a long while, as if woken up from a long nightmare. Seeing her joy, Hyun-woo couldn't bear to reveal the painful truth behind the surgery. Afterwards, they slept peacefully side by side and Hae-in experienced a good night's sleep for the first time in ages. Upon waking, her joy was palpable, thrilled at the prospect of living longer and being with her beloved. They then enjoyed a day out, reliving the joy of their early days together, truly cherishing their moments as a married couple. Hae-in promised herself that after the surgery, she would continue to enjoy life with Hyun-woo, focusing on living fully rather than being consumed by work. Hae-in wanted to reveal to Hyun-woo 3 secrets she had kept from him, planning to disclose one each day until her departure for surgery in Germany. The first secret she shared was about a music player. She confessed it was hers and that she had lost it at the schoolyard years ago. Hyun-woo was stunned by the revelation, finding the coincidence unbelievable. Hae-in reminisced about their first meeting, when she was immediately charmed by his good looks, regretting that she had to leave for her studies abroad shortly after. Hyun-woo had not forgotten that girl either, remembering her wearing black loafers. He described her as a fair-skinned girl with a high ponytail, thinking she was the girl of his dreams. The very next day, he had searched the entire school for her but to no avail. Hyun-woo likened Hae-in to Cinderella who left behind nothing but the music player, driving him crazy with curiosity. What Hyun-woo hadn't expected was that this girl would later become his wife, though they were now divorced. After hearing this, Hae-in showed him the ring she had been wearing, deciding to withdraw their divorce application. Hyun-woo, emotionally overwhelmed, hugged Hae-in tightly and insisted she promise not to change her mind. He expressed his hope that even if one day Hae-in woke up disliking him, she would not change her mind, regardless of whether she lost her memory or could no longer recognize him as her husband. After securing Mr. Man's secret fund, Mrs. Soo-hyun kept her previous promise and prepared a savings book with a large amount of money for Grace-go. However, Grace-go can only spend this money with Mrs. Soo-hyun's permission, a rule set due to a repeated betrayal. Yoon-sung discovered that Hae-in's uncle was secretly collaborating with the director of Average, fearing he might try to rebuild and take over the Queen's Corporation. Thus, Yoon-sung used the secret fund to buy out Average, a move that Hyun-woo and Hae-in were well aware of. Everyone wanted to expose Yoon-sung for embezzlement and abuse of power, with the real estate broker Seung-yuki being a key witness. Unexpectedly, Seung-yuki was found dead at Sembang Lake, stabbed multiple times, and his body was decomposing. That night, everyone discussed returning to their old home, but Soo-chul expressed a desire to move out with his family if they could find a rental. Hae-in shared a similar thought, wanting to move into Hyun-woo's studio. After everything that had happened, Hae-in's parents could no longer stop her. While everyone agreed with Hae-in, Soo-chul's case required further consideration. Later, Mrs. Sean-woo revealed her deep feelings to Hae-in, viewing her daughter's birth as a gift from heaven. After 20 years of friction between them, she felt guilty and regretful. Mrs. Seon-woo was embarrassed by her sudden shift to caring for Hae-in but promised that their mother-daughter relationship would gradually become closer after Hae-in's surgery. The next day, Hae-in and Hyun-woo moved into his studio, spending the entire day inseparably close, doing everything together. This period was arguably the happiest time for both of them. That day, Yoon-sung asked Hyun-woo about Haeun's upcoming surgery in Germany. Knowing that Hyun-woo would accompany Haeun, Yoon-sung asked him to take care of her. Yoon-sung was aware of the complications from the surgery and advised Hyun-woo to keep it secret so that she could continue to live. That evening, Haeun was surprised to see everyone preparing for Christmas so early, unaware that all these preparations were made by Hyun-woo alone. Knowing that Haeun loved seeing snow, he wanted to create an early wish for her, stepping out as if it were the moment he first confessed his love to Haeun. At this moment, Haeun revealed to Hyun-woo her second secret, about her first love. She reminded Hyun-woo of bus route 372, which he often took after work. She had followed that bus across the Han River countless times, disregarding the busy roads and frequent traffic jams just because he was on that bus. Despite this, Hyun-woo still hadn't realized he was Haeun's first love, which truly frustrated her. He then followed Haeun, laughing gleefully upon realizing he was indeed her first love, the person he had always been jealous of whenever Haeun mentioned. Back at the hotel, Hyun-woo was deeply worried about the prospect of Haeun losing her memory, but what mattered most to him was the chance to see her continue living, even if she might forget him as her husband. Later, Hyun-woo went to a church to pray, and unexpectedly, Haeun quietly followed him there. Hyun-woo's prayer was for Haeun to undergo the surgery. He wasn't hoping she would remember everything, just that she might live on. Haeun thought it was a futile prayer and suggested they should go back. Then, Haeun asked Hyun-woo to take her to a place they had visited during their honeymoon, a field of flowers. Haeun remembered everything about that day, how she felt jealous when other girls looked at him. She really didn't want to forget those beautiful memories with Hyun-woo, fearing that the field would become just an ordinary place and Hyun-woo a stranger to her. That's why Haeun didn't want the surgery. She wanted to live and die as herself, with her memories intact. When people found out that Haeun was refusing surgery, they called to persuade her. Mr. Byung-jun explained how Hyun-woo had worked tirelessly, contacting hospitals. He had sent hundreds of emails and called US and European hospitals in the middle of the night to find labs or hospitals that could save you. Thus, Mr. Byung-jun advised his daughter to think it over carefully, suggesting she choose to keep living now and worry about regaining her memories later. Now, Haeun faced the most difficult decision of her life, torn between wanting to live and not wanting to forget the people she loves. The doctor advised Hyun-woo to proceed with the surgery soon, as any delay could affect Haeun's chances of survival. Hyun-woo returned to her room only to find it empty, which set him off in a frantic search for her. He rushed to the church, but Haeun had already left. As he passed by the prayer wall, Hyun-woo saw the wishes Haeun had left behind. What Haeun desired most was to keep her memories with her loved ones. She didn't ask for salvation, only to cherish those beautiful memories until the end. Outside, Hyun-woo found Haeun crying alone and embraced her tightly as tears streamed down his face. Haeun didn't want to see Hyun-woo as a stranger, but Hyun-woo believed, even if that's the case, I'll be the first person you meet. Then you'll fall in love with me again. I'll be by your side even if you don't fall for me, ignore me, or dislike me. I made a promise that I'd stay by your side even if you had debt or something more. Hyun-woo was terrified at the thought of living without Haeun, and nothing else mattered to him. He wept loudly and pleaded with Haeun to undergo the surgery, but it seemed she couldn't fulfill his request. The next morning, Haeun noticed that Hyun-woo was acting unusually charming, performing a series of actions that seemed designed to attract female attention. He even admitted to Haeun that he was deliberately acting this way, suggesting that losing a man like him would be a waste. Haeun constantly told Hyun-woo to roll down his sleeves, but he ignored her, so she had to do it herself. Yoon-sung witnessed this entire interaction, likely boiling with jealousy. Grace Go learned that Mrs. Soo-hyun had sent someone to Germany, possibly to deal with Haeun. She immediately called Hyun-woo to check on them. Though Grace didn't reveal everything, she felt somewhat relieved knowing they were still okay. Later, Hyun-woo was outside when a truck crashed into his car, with Haeun still inside. Panicked, he tried to break the car door as the vehicle caught fire. Despite his efforts, the door wouldn't budge, and he bloodied his hands. Surprisingly, Haeun was not in the car but behind him, calling out his name. She scolded him for recklessly pounding on the car door, and he explained that he thought she was trapped inside. He expressed his fear of losing her, whether now or in the future. Haeun then revealed that she had stepped out to buy him a gift, which serendipitously saved her life. At this moment, Hae-in agreed to undergo the surgery. She feared losing her memory, but feared losing Hyun-woo even more. She didn't want to see him cry, a promise they made when she first confessed her love to him. Hyun-woo thanked Hae-in for agreeing to the surgery. Before entering the surgery room, Hae-in asked Hyun-woo to be by her side when she opened her eyes, comparing herself to a newly hatched duckling that would imprint on the first person she saw. Hyun-woo held Hae-in's hand tightly, constantly reassuring her, "Just get the surgery and come back." As soon as Hae-in left, Hyun-woo broke down crying and collapsed, tormented by thoughts of the future. Moments later, Hyun-woo stood outside, overjoyed to hear that the surgery was progressing well, but was shocked when the police approached him. They arrested him for the murder of the broker Seung-uk, but Hyun-woo knew nothing about. He pleaded with the police for just 30 more minutes to see Hae-in, but it was impossible. It seemed like a premeditated plan by Yoon-sung, who appeared unexpectedly to take over caring for Hae-in. Back in Korea, everyone worried about Hae-in's situation upon learning of Hyun-woo's arrest but unable to remember Hyun-woo's number. They called the hospital instead. After the hospital informed Yoon-sung that Hae-in's father had called, Yoon-sung called back, announcing that the surgery had been successfully completed, and they were just waiting for Hae-in to recover. Mr. Byum-jun worriedly expressed desire to fly over to be with his daughter, but Yoon-sung claimed that was impossible. He informed Mr. Byum-jun that he was under investigation for embezzlement and abuse of power. The prosecution will begin their investigation soon, so you won't be able to fly out, Yoon-sung stated. Mr. Byum-jun was furious, but felt powerless in the situation. In her dream, Hae-in recalled the moment Hyun-woo proposed to her for the second time, and she remembered their wedding and the joyful memories with him. However, when she opened her eyes, it wasn't Hyun-woo she saw, but Yoon-sung. He replaced Hyun-woo, telling Hae-in about her illness. He said, "You've just had a tumor removed from your brain, and before the surgery, you asked me to be by your side when you woke up." Indeed, Hae-in had lost all her memories, but the only thing that stirred in her mind was the name Hyun-woo, which Yoon-sung admitted he was not. He then showed her a photo of them dating in college and also revealed that Hyun-woo was her ex-husband. He told her that Hyun-woo had deceived her, which led to their divorce, and Hyun-woo was detained by international police for murder. Meanwhile, Hae-in couldn't recall anything except for the name Hyun-woo, not knowing who that was. She spent all day by the window, watching the snow, noticing a smudge of paint on her finger and feeling a sharp pain in her heart. On the other side, Hyun-woo felt a similar emotion, shedding tears, not knowing how Hae-in was faring or whether her surgery had been successful. Both watched the snow fall as if seeing each other in it, and their tears flowed freely. Yoon-sung began plotting to replace Hyun-woo in taking care of Hae-in. He burned the diary that Hae-in had sent to Hyun-woo before her surgery, intending to prevent her from ever regaining her memory. During Hae-in's hospital recovery, the despicable Yoon-sung continuously manipulated her psychologically. He told her that Hyun-woo had followed her to this place to amend his will. Moreover, Yoon-sung lied about nearly having an accident because a truck crashed into their car, and he claimed that Hyun-woo was behind it. He further accused Hyun-woo of infidelity in having prepared a divorce agreement, causing Hae-in once to attempt ending her own life. Hae-in easily believed what he said, as she was like a newly hatched duckling, unable to remember anything that had happened before the surgery. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo had returned to South Korea to give a statement, being accused of murdering a real estate broker, as all evidence at the scene pointed to him. Hair from Hyun-woo was found in the victim's car, and a weapon found nearby had his fingerprints. Hyun-woo insisted someone was framing him, but clearly, he had no concrete evidence to prove his innocence. A month later, Hae-in returned to her country after her health stabilized. She recognized all her family members, but consistently shunned them. Yoon-sung prevented everyone from approaching Hae-in, and while Soo-hyun angrily confronted him, Hae-in stepped in to defend Yoon-sung. Previously, the despicable Yoon-sung filled Hae-in's head with lies, telling her, "They'll claim that I kicked them out and took over Queens." But here's the truth. The chairman was sick of his family fighting over his money, and gave me his position before he passed away. He even went on to say, "He wanted you to inherit everything, but he knew the family wouldn't allow that. Your so-called family members were delighted to hear that you were dying soon." He maliciously alleged that her family was trying to contact her because they wanted your voting right for the stockholders meeting. "They're worried because I want to reinstate you," he advised. "They wanted to speak to you, but I said no. You had asked me to do so before the surgery." He continually urged Hae-in not to trust her family. After Yoon Sung's manipulative remarks and Haein reading similar news in the media, she was convinced of the truth. She no longer wanted to face her family, and while everyone knew that Haein was being manipulated by Yoon Sung, they felt powerless to intervene. Later, Haein expressed a desire to return to her old home, thinking it might help her regain her memory. She also thanked Yoon Sung for always being by her side, to which he cunningly replied that she only needed to keep her previous promise to marry him after her successful surgery. Haein did not doubt his intentions. Yoon Sung knew that it was Mrs. Soo-hyun behind the accident that targeted Haein, and he threatened his mother if she continued her schemes. The painting Yoon Sung gave to Mr. Man-dae contained a hidden camera, recording everything Mrs. Soo-hyun did to him. It was Yoon Sung's leverage to blackmail her if she dared to harm Haein ever again. When Haein returned to her home, she found the room completely empty. Yoon Sung had cleared everything out beforehand to prevent her from regaining her memories. Curiously entering Hyun-woo's room, Haein discovered a music player. She listened to it and felt that his music taste was remarkably similar to hers. Curious about who Hyun-woo was, she decided she needed to meet him, even if it was just to understand her supposed enemy better. The next day, Haein visited the prison to see Hyun-woo. Upon seeing her, he was visibly moved, his eyes widening with emotion. He was joyful to see Haein looking well again, despite knowing she had lost all her memories. Hyun-woo continuously asked about her health, inquiring if she was okay, how her surgery went, and if she was in any pain. However, Haein's gaze was filled with disdain, viewing him as a terrible husband who had deceived her. She revealed that she knew all the terrible things about him, the affairs, the divorce, and the disgraceful acts he had committed behind her back. Hyun-woo realized that Yoon Sung had manipulated her perceptions and firmly told Haein that things were not as they seemed, urging her to trust his words. He understood that Haein's visit was driven by curiosity rather than conviction in Yoon Sung's lies. Haein admitted she came out of curiosity about him, and having met him, she didn't want to see him again. But for Hyun-woo, it was different. He vowed to see her again, refusing to give up and determined to stay by her side. Tearfully, Hyun-woo apologized for not being there when she woke up, forcing her to come to him in such circumstances. His final words to Haein were a plea to eat well, not to worry too much, to follow her treatment, and to take care of herself for his sake. Once outside, Haein inwardly cursed Hyun-woo, calling him a cunning man. Despite being imprisoned, he was still trying to deceive her. Yet, it was clear that Haein felt a pang in her heart after hearing his words. Feeling very strange, she quickly went to a drugstore to buy anti-nausea medication because her heart was pounding rapidly and her eyes were welling up as if she was about to cry. That day, when Haein and Yoon Sung showed up at the company together, everyone was shocked. They couldn't understand what had happened or why the two were so close. Rumors about their upcoming marriage baffled everyone, especially since so much had happened before. Hyun-woo asked his close friend to review the prosecution's evidence file, suspecting that any omitted evidence might be favorable to him. Yang Ji later discovered that the prosecutors had overlooked a thread at the crime scene, which he believed could belong to the actual perpetrator's clothing. Mrs. Hyun-woo and a detective also visited Hyun-woo in jail. Hyun-woo admitted that the knife found at the crime scene was indeed his and recalled that it had been missing a few days before he and Haein went to Germany, prompting him to ask the detective to check the security cameras. A few days later, during Hyun-woo's trial, Yoon Sung appeared very smug. At the trial, Hyun-woo denied the accusations against him regarding the murder of the real estate broker. He confirmed that he had agreed to meet the victim, but had not gone to the rendezvous. Yang Ji, acting as Hyun-woo's defense attorney, pointed out that the knife had a green acrylic fiber on it. He presented images showing that Hyun-woo had not worn green that day, and the surveillance footage showed that the thief who had stolen the knife was wearing green. The thief was also seen burning a green shirt and gloves about 2 kilometers from the crime scene. Yang Ji presented evidence that the burned fabric matched the fibers on the murder weapon, and the victim's blood and DNA were found on the burnt shirt. The prosecutor was not satisfied, dismissing the evidence as circumstantial, but Hyun-woo and Yang Ji had anticipated this. If it were a hired assassin, he would have returned to the scene to collect evidence for his employer, and they needed his phone. Thanks to the detective, they managed to clone the killer's phone data. Yang Ji immediately submitted the photos and videos from the phone to the judge. Sitting below, Yoon Sung realized his plan had failed and silently left, visibly frustrated. The real perpetrator was later arrested on a fishing boat, confessing to acting alone without any backers. Hyun-woo was acquitted and set free. Outside, Hae-in was anxious as she had not yet seen Hyun-woo released. Her secretary wondered why they were there, and Hae-in responded that she needed to be cautious because he was a dangerous stalker. At that moment, Hyun-woo was released, much to his family's joy. Seeing Hyun-woo's family so happy, Hae-in noted in her journal that they seemed very harmonious, as if she wanted to understand everything about him. Hyun-woo returned home to a warm welcome from everyone in the village, while Hae-in followed him there. She was surprised to see her brother there too. Her secretary mentioned he was staying to avoid their mother. Seeing Soo-chil getting along so well with Hyun-woo's family piqued Hae-in's curiosity. She even peeked through the fence to observe everything. Noting that Hyun-woo's parents were genuinely kind, she recorded things he liked and disliked. Her secretary likened Hae-in's behavior to that of a hardcore fan chasing after their idol, reminiscent of how she once followed the band BTS as a child. In Germany, a man cleaning up trash discovered a journal that Yoon-sung had attempted to burn, but failed to destroy completely. He sent it to the hospital, coincidentally just as Hyun-woo's close friend had been inquiring about this very journal. After being acquitted, Hyun-woo requested to be reinstated at work, a request that Yoon-sung, unable to deny due to Hyun-woo's innocence, had to accept. Additionally, U.S. investors were threatening to remove Yoon-sung unless he provided or falsified financial documents. Furious at the prospect of being ousted, Yoon-sung planned to buy more company shares to secure his position. This information reached Hyun-woo and Hae-in's family. Hyun-woo had evidence proving Yoon-sung embezzled $2 trillion to take over Queen's Group, provided by Soo-chil's wife from the U.S. That day at the company, Hae-in encountered Hyun-woo and initially tried to avoid him, but then reconsidered why she should. Wanting to understand why Hyun-woo was there, she arranged to meet him. Hyun-woo shared that he had been reinstated, but Hae-in felt uncomfortable seeing him. She wished he would resign and find another job elsewhere. Frustrated, Hae-in left, but her bag snagged on a chair. She thought Hyun-woo was trying to hold her back and asked him not to. When she turned and saw the truth, she was embarrassed but tried to maintain her composure before leaving. The next morning, Hae-in saw a parcel from the hospital in Germany on the table, but before she could open it, Grace Go appeared. Grace hugged her, feigning sympathy for Hae-in's memory loss. Hae-in felt uncomfortable with the overly familiar gesture and quickly left, forgetting the parcel on the table, which Grace then noticed. On her way to the company, Hae-in received a package she had mailed to herself, containing a QR code for an aquarium. Curious, she went there, scanned the code, and entered. Inside, she was surprised to see Hyun-woo and asked why he was there. Hyun-woo showed her the QR code, explaining it was an invitation she had sent him. Suddenly, the lights dimmed and a video of their wedding played, showing messages they had recorded for their future selves, expressing happiness at being together. After the video, an employee came forward with a bouquet, explaining that Hae-in had booked this aquarium and sent the flowers for Hyun-woo. Hae-in was puzzled, asking when she had made the booking. The employee replied it was last month, and also 4 years ago, it was the place where Hae-in first proposed to Hyun-woo. A month ago, she had rented it again, planning to do the same for their vow renewal, anticipating her memory loss. Now, Hae-in couldn't believe this was real. Hyun-woo didn't expect her to believe him at the moment but hoped she wouldn't trust the deceitful Yoon-sung, who never protected her and isolated her from her family and him. Seeing the scars on Hyun-woo's hands, Hae-in felt confused, wondering if Hyun-woo was the one who truly tried to save her from the car, contrary to what Yoon-sung had told her. Back at home, Hae-in wanted to ask Yoon-sung something, but he said he would get more wine and return later. At that moment, Yoon-sung's tablet displayed an unopened email containing a video link, which piqued Hae-in's curiosity. She was shocked to discover numerous videos secretly filmed at her home, and quickly turned off the device as Yoon-sung re-entered the room. He then suggested they move to the US together, reasoning that both had been abandoned by their families and should leave everything behind. Hae-in responded by asking, "Are you sure I was abandoned?" Yoon-sung was taken aback, and she said they would talk after he sobered up. As Hae-in was about to leave, Yoon-sung grabbed her arm, reminding her, "You had a question for me." Hae-in replied that she no longer felt the need to ask. She then called Hyun-woo to discuss something important, and they agreed to meet. The parcel was still unopened, so Hae-in finally decided to see what was inside. It was her journal that the hospital had sent back, filled with personal entries she had written for Hyun-woo before her surgery. If I fail to wake up, then this could be my will. I won't ask you to mourn me for 3 years like in the past, and call out to me when you're drunk. But after that, forget about me and live your life. Fall in love passionately, get married, and have a family of your own. As for my assets, spend them how you deem fit. But what if the surgery is a success, but I forget who you are? What if I treat you like a stranger? Or even worse, what if I mistreat you? What if you can't take it anymore and get sick of me? Even if that happens, don't get sick of me. Don't get exhausted. Keep loving me. My ideal type will never change, so I'll fall for you again. Next are the diary entries Hae-in wrote to herself, introducing everything about Hyun-woo in case she loses her memory. He is incredibly handy and can fix anything, easily deceived and overly trusting. He is adorable when drunk, and cries easily, so don't hurt him. The final thing Hae-in impresses upon herself is that he is the reason she doesn't want to lose her memories. Hyun-woo is someone she wants to remember for a lifetime. In a rush, Hae-in heads to their meeting spot, tears choking her words as she repeatedly apologizes to him. Seeing her, Hyun-woo loudly calls out his wife's name, a familiar sound. They are only a street apart, yet it feels endlessly far. They both wish the traffic light would change so they could embrace each other. But it doesn't happen. As a bus passes by, Hyun-woo loses sight of Hae-in. He rushes across to find her when suddenly a car strikes him, and he collapses before he can reach her. It turned out that Yoon-sung was the one driving the car. After executing his plan, he quickly arranged for a substitute driver to take the blame. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo was rushed to the hospital by an ambulance, while Yoon-sung made his escape. In a strange place, Hae-in woke up unable to escape due to the locked doors. Hearing footsteps, she hid, then knocked out a guard who opened the door to check, and ran outside only to face Yoon-sung again. She then remembered everything. While waiting for Hyun-woo to cross the street, Yoon-sung's men had kidnapped her, drugged her, and taken her to this location. Yoon-sung shamelessly claimed his actions were to protect Hae-in, arguing he didn't want her to meet Hyun-woo again and be deceived. He also demanded to know why Hae-in was looking for Hyun-woo. Emotional, she explained, "I saw the notebook. Someone sent it from Germany. I must written it before the surgery. It looked like my handwriting. But the details differed from what you told me, so I wanted to check." Hae-in apologized to Yoon-sung for not asking him first, regretting her doubts and for upsetting him, promising it would not happen again. She then asked Yoon-sung to take her home. However, Yoon-sung still planned for them to move to the US and marry, revealing a helicopter would arrive the next morning. He had everything ready, and all Hae-in had to do was follow. Hearing this, Hae-in was really worried but tried to appear calm to avoid raising Yoon-sung's suspicions. She decided to go along with his plan, as she felt like she was in a den of wolves. After regaining consciousness, Hyun-woo immediately contacted Grace-go, requesting her to inform Mrs. Soo-hyun about Hae-in's disappearance, believing she would locate Hae-in faster. Grace-go then revealed this to Mrs. Soo-hyun, suspecting Yoon-sung's involvement. If Mrs. Soo-hyun could not find Hae-in, it would impact her inauguration ceremony. Later, Mrs. Soo-hyun wanted to transfer a large sum of money to a safe, but was informed by the bank that Yoon-sung had already converted the money to dollars and taken it. Realizing her son was planning to flee with Hae-in, she set out to find them. Grace-go informed Hyun-woo about this development. Subsequently, Hyun-woo and Yang Ji followed Mrs. Soo-hyun's convoy. Yang Ji criticized Hyun-woo for leaving the emergency room, but Hyun-woo couldn't sit still knowing Hae-in was in danger, prioritizing her safety over his own health. They followed Mrs. Soo-hyun's convoy to a hunting ground where Yoon-sung was holding Hae-in. Hyun-woo decided to enter alone to check, while Yang Ji stayed outside to watch. With his wounds still painful, Hyun-woo moved carefully. Due to the many guards, he couldn't sneak in unnoticed. He approached an uncle living nearby to borrow a key to the kitchen, promising to explain everything later if things went smoothly. Inside, Mrs. Soo-hyun demanded Yoon-sung return the money and any files, allowing him to leave afterward. Yoon-sung advised her not to worry about the files, as he was adept at keeping secrets. He reminded her of the old story when Hae-in's family had an accident and her brother died. It was Mrs. Soo-hyun who sabotaged their boat, intending to kill Hae-in's entire family to seize control of the Queen's group. Yoon-sung, having witnessed his mother commit this atrocious act, had promised to keep it a secret. Now, Yoon-sung agreed to leave behind the files documenting Mrs. Soo-hyun's actions against Mr. Man-dae, but he could not part with the money. Inside, Hae-in overheard everything. Feeling someone's presence, Mrs. Soo-hyun went to check. Suddenly, the lights flickered off, and sensing something amiss, Yoon-sung went to check on Hae-in. He called out for Hae-in, but she hid silently in a corner. When Hae-in opened a door to escape, she unexpectedly ran into Hyun-woo. Immediately, Hyun-woo took her hand, and they both fled the house. Realizing this, Yoon-sung grabbed his hunting rifle to pursue them. Wounded, Hyun-woo found escaping difficult, but after a search, Yoon-sung located them. At the same time, Yang Ji outside called the police and opened the gate to let them directly into the premises. Meanwhile, Yoon-sung asked Hae-in why she was there, continually persuading her to come with him. Hae-in responded, "I felt uneasy and disliked you even when I couldn't remember anything. And now, I know why." When sweet talk failed to sway Hae-in, Yoon-sung drew his gun and aimed it at the two. The police had arrived by then and surrounded Yoon-sung. He apologized to Hae-in, saying he couldn't leave her behind. Yoon-sung fired at Hae-in, but Hyun-woo stepped in and took the bullet for her. As Yoon-sung attempted another shot, the police timely shut him down, and he collapsed, receiving the fate he deserved. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo also collapsed in Hae-in's arms, and in a torrent of tears, she continuously cried out his name in agony. Hyun-woo was quickly rushed to the hospital for emergency care, urging Hae-in not to go anywhere, wanting her to be the first person he saw after surgery. Hae-in, recalling her own surgery and the words exactly like his, blamed herself for forgetting who he was, seeing him as a stranger, and treating him poorly. Meanwhile, Mrs. Soo-hyun also took all the money from the secret fund and left. The police were also there to inform her of Yoon-sung's death. In the car, Mrs. Soo-hyun looked at a photo of her son as a child and shed tears thinking about the misfortunes Yoon-sung had endured. At the same time, Hae-in's parents were revisiting family photos, which Hae-in's mother had avoided because they reminded her of her deceased son. However, things were different now as she had come to terms with the painful reality. Surprisingly, she noticed an unfamiliar boy in one of the photos. Hae-in's mother suddenly remembered Hyun-woo's mother mentioning that her son was an excellent swimmer and had saved someone before. The photos shown by Hyun-woo's mother were from the location of her family's accident. Just then, Mrs. Byung-ya arrived to update everyone on Hyun-woo's situation, and when they reached the hospital, they learned that Hyun-woo had used his body to protect Hae-in. Hae-in continuously apologized to her in-laws, blaming herself, but Hyun-woo's mother comforted her, assuring her it was all right. Hae-in's mother realized that the person who had saved Hae-in years ago was none other than Hyun-woo, as the timing and location matched perfectly. Indeed, that year after the boating accident with her family, Hyun-woo had rescued her from the clutches of death. Hae-in's mother apologized to Hyun-woo's mother for not recognizing her son's heroism sooner and for having caused him pain and difficulty. Meanwhile, Mrs. Soo-hyun is determined to take over the shares left by Yoon-sung, claiming that her son was the instigator of all the trouble, absolving herself of any involvement. She plans to proceed with her inauguration ceremony, never abandoning her ambition to take control of Queen's group. After several days of treatment, Hyun-woo finally regains consciousness, bringing great joy and relief to Hae-in. He always affectionately calls his wife's name first, showing his concern for her well-being over his own. Hae-in, feeling increasingly guilty for always being his concern, apologizes for not recognizing him before. Hyun-woo also apologizes for not keeping his promise to be by her side when she woke up. He had forgotten how deeply he loved her, causing her pain and suffering. Holding Hyun-woo's hand tightly, Hae-in sheds tears of joy, grateful that he has returned to her. Mrs. Soo-hyun now holds the largest share of the corporation at 45%, while the frozen shares of Hae-in's family amount to only 39%. Hyun-woo is aware that Mrs. Soo-hyun illegally used a secret fund to acquire an additional 13% of the shares, which must be returned to the government. He plans to file a lawsuit to invalidate her acquisition and defeat her. To reclaim the frozen shares, everyone needs to prove Mrs. Soo-hyun's involvement in the wrongdoing. Soo-chil's wife convinces Grace Go to come forward and confess their roles. On that day, the lawsuit against Mrs. Soo-hyun was held. As the lawyer for Hae-in's family, Hyun-woo requested the court to invalidate the 13% of shares that Mrs. Soo-hyun had recently acquired. However, her attorney argued that her inheritance was legal, covering everything from shares to the money left by her son. In response, Hyun-woo accused Mrs. Soo-hyun of conspiring to embezzle 2 trillion won, a plan previously devised by Yoon-sung with the intent to seize power. Hyun-woo had all the evidence to support his accusations, but her lawyer contended that Yoon-sung was the relevant party, not Mrs. Soo-hyun. She then dramatically wept in court, claiming that she and her son had been estranged for over 20 years, so she was unaware of his actions. Da-hae stood as a witness to expose the lies, admitting that Mrs. Soo-hyun had instructed her to introduce Yoon-sung to Soo-cheol and then persuaded her husband to invest in the scam. However, when asked for proof of Mrs. Soo-hyun's directives, Da-hae had none, thus her testimony was not fully persuasive in court. Mrs. Soo-hyun continued her tearful act, mourning her recently deceased son, and claimed that Mr. Man-dae had entrusted the company to her before his death because he did not trust his own descendants. Hae-in intervened as a witness after accidentally overhearing a conversation between Mrs. Soo-hyun and Yoon-sung, indicating that Yoon-sung had evidence of Mrs. Soo-hyun murdering Chairman Man-dae. This revelation shocked the courtroom, and Hyun-woo presented a video of Mrs. Soo-hyun poisoning Mr. Man-dae, which left her utterly alarmed. It turns out that earlier, Grace Go had swapped Yoon-sung's tablet and handed the video to Hyun-woo. With this undeniable evidence, Mrs. Soo-hyun had no way out and was arrested while continuously screaming her innocence. Following the investigation, Hae-in's family had all their rights restored within Queen's Group, while Yoon-sung and Mrs. Soo-hyun faced charges for orchestrating the investment fraud. Those associated with them, including Grace Go and Da-hae, were also convicted. Mrs. Soo-hyun was additionally accused of conspiring to kill Mr. Man-dae, investment fraud, violating foreign exchange transactions, and identity theft. Life eventually returned to peace for everyone, and the bond between Hae-in and Hyun-woo remained unchanged. One day, Hae-in returned home and noticed a solitary star on the ceiling, prompting memories of the past. During a conflict when Hyun-woo had decided to sleep separately, she thought he blamed her for their first miscarriage. However, Hyun-woo always insisted that wasn't the case, which only deepened their misunderstandings. The next day, as they walked along a cherry blossom path, Hae-in confessed, "I remembered my worst memory last night. It devastated and hurt me greatly, but I was relieved as well. I'm less afraid now than when I was in the dark." She realized that their growing distance was due to trivial matters, unintentional actions taken to protect their egos, leading to foolish misunderstandings. Instead of knocking on his door, she had chosen to stay in her room, annoyed with him. Hae-in promised from then on not to act that way, and hoped they both would do the same. Hyun-woo then took her hand, vowing to always be by her side, no matter what happens, and if things ever fell apart, he would be there to fix them. Immediately after, Hyun-woo confessed his love to Hae-in, but she wanted more time to decide on their remarriage. She playfully added, "You can only hug me after we hold hands at least 5 times, leaving Hyun-woo astonished. Hyun-woo envisioned their future together, sharing breakfasts, taking daily walks, and traveling each season, desires that Hae-in also cherished. After some time, Da-hae was released from prison, finally having a true family beside her son and her loving husband, Soo-cheol. Grace Go, too, was no longer alone as Soo-cheol came to take her home. Hyun-woo and Hae-in led a fulfilling life, happily together with their first child, overcoming their past miscarriage which had once troubled their marriage. Years later, as Hyun-woo aged into an old man and after Hae-in had passed away due to old age, he continued to visit the places they had once explored together. Hyun-woo was forever grateful to Hae-in, considering their life together a miracle, believing that even in loss, their love persisted in each other's hearts. This marks the end of the movie The Queen of Tears, which drew many tears from its audience but ultimately delivered a happy ending. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to not miss out on new films. Goodbye and see you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more engaging videos.